Welcome, weary wanderer, to the shadowed halls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where childhood dreams and darkest nightmares intertwine like threads in a tapestry woven from innocence and tragedy. Tonight, we delve into one of the most haunting chapters in the chronicles of animatronic horror, the Missing Children incident, a tale that transformed a place of joy into a monument to unspeakable loss. Here, in these dimly lit corridors where laughter once echoed, we'll uncover the truth behind 5 young souls whose stories became legend, whose voices still whisper through circuits and servos. Close your eyes and let us begin this gentle journey through darkness toward understanding. In the golden years of the 1970s and early 80s, when arcade games beeped their electronic melodies in darkened corners and children's birthday parties were simple affairs of cake and streamers, there existed a dream so pure and ambitious that it seemed destined to bring joy to countless families for generations to come. This was the era when 2 brilliant minds came together to create something the world had never seen before. A restaurant where technology and entertainment would merge into an experience that would capture the hearts and imaginations of children everywhere. The story begins not with darkness but with light, not with horror but with hope, in a small establishment that would become the foundation stone upon which an empire of family entertainment would be built. Fredbear's Family Diner was more than just a restaurant. It was a testament to the power of innovation and the endless possibilities that emerged when creative vision met technological ambition. The diner occupied a modest space in a growing suburban community, its cheerful yellow walls and red-checkered tablecloths creating an atmosphere of warmth and welcome that drew families from miles around. At the heart of this establishment stood a creation that seemed to blur the line between fantasy and reality: Fredbear himself, a golden animatronic bear whose movements were so lifelike and whose voice so warm and inviting that children would often forget they were looking at a machine rather than a living, breathing friend. Fredbear was not merely a robot programmed to perform predetermined actions. He was the physical embodiment of childhood wonder, a technological marvel that could sing, dance, tell jokes, and interact with his young audience in ways that seemed almost magical to those who witnessed his performances. The genius behind this creation was a partnership between 2 men whose complementary skills and shared vision would reshape the landscape of family entertainment forever. Henry Emily possessed the technical brilliance necessary to bring mechanical dreams to life, his understanding of engineering and robotics so advanced that his creations seemed to possess souls of their own. His partner, William Afton, brought business acumen and an understanding of what families wanted from their dining and entertainment experiences, his charismatic personality making him the perfect face for their growing enterprise. Together, they envisioned a future where animatronic entertainment would become as common as jukeboxes or arcade machines, where children could celebrate their most important moments in the company of characters who felt like old friends. Their dream extended far beyond a single restaurant. They saw a chain of establishments that would bring joy and wonder to communities across the nation, each one a haven where families could gather to create memories that would last a lifetime. The success of Fredbear's Family Diner exceeded even their most optimistic projections. Parents who had initially been skeptical of the strange singing bear found themselves charmed by the quality of the food, the cleanliness of the establishment, and most importantly, the pure delight they saw in their children's faces during every visit. Birthday parties became elaborate affairs, where the birthday child would receive personal attention from Fredbear himself, the golden bear singing special songs and leading games that made each celebration feel unique and magical. Word of the remarkable diner spread through the community like ripples on a pond, carried by satisfied customers who could hardly contain their enthusiasm for what they had experienced. Local newspapers wrote glowing reviews, praising not only the innovative entertainment but also the restaurant's commitment to quality food and exceptional service. Television stations sent reporters to document this new form of family entertainment, their news segments helping to establish Fredbear's as a destination that was worth traveling to experience. The waiting list for birthday party reservations grew longer each month, with some families booking their celebrations months in advance to secure their preferred dates. Children who had attended parties at Fredbear's would beg their parents to return for regular meals, their fascination with the Golden Bear creating a level of customer loyalty that traditional restaurants could only dream of achieving. The animatronic had become more than entertainment. He had become a beloved figure in the community, a friend that children looked forward to visiting, and a draw that brought families together in an atmosphere of shared wonder. As the success of the original diner became undeniable, Emily and Afton began to dream bigger. They envisioned expanding their concept into something grander, a full-scale family entertainment center that would offer not just one animatronic performer but an entire cast of characters, each with their own personality and specialties. The idea of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began to take shape in their minds, a larger establishment that would feature multiple animatronic performers, arcade games, and a dining area, spacious enough to accommodate the crowds they expected to attract. The planning phase for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza consumed months of careful consideration and meticulous design. Every aspect of the restaurant was conceived with the customer experience in mind, from the layout of the dining area to the positioning of the main stage where their animatronic band would perform. They studied traffic patterns and acoustics, ensuring that families could enjoy their meals while still being able to see and hear the performances that were the restaurant's main attraction. The animatronic band they designed for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza represented a quantum leap forward from their earlier creation. Freddy Fazbear himself would serve as the lead singer and frontman, his brown bear design evoking feelings of comfort and reliability, while his top hat and bow tie gave him an air of showmanship that was perfect for his role as the band's leader. Bonnie the Bunny would handle guitar duties, his blue coloring and laid-back personality making him the cool musician of the group. Chica the Chicken would provide backup vocals while showcasing her love of pizza, making her the perfect mascot for a restaurant that prided itself on its delicious food. Foxy the Pirate Fox was perhaps the most ambitious of their creations. Designed as a separate attraction in his own area of the restaurant, Pirate's Cove would transport children to a world of high-seas adventure, where Foxy would regale them with tales of treasure and exploration, while parents could enjoy a brief respite from the main dining area's bustling activity. Each character was given distinct personality traits and programmed with hundreds of different interactions, ensuring that return visits would always offer something new and exciting for young guests. The technology behind these animatronics represented the cutting edge of what was possible in the early 1980s. Each character was equipped with sophisticated servo motors that allowed for smooth, lifelike movements, while their facial expressions were controlled by intricate systems of pulleys and mechanical components that could convey a remarkable range of emotions. The audio systems were equally advanced, with each character possessing a unique voice that had been carefully crafted to match their personality and role within the group. The grand opening of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was an event that the community had anticipated for months. Local dignitaries were invited to attend the ribbon-cutting ceremony, while families lined up around the block for their chance to experience this new wonder of family entertainment. The restaurant exceeded capacity within hours of opening, with parents and children alike marveling at the technological sophistication and pure entertainment value of the animatronic performances. The success was immediate and overwhelming. Reservations for birthday parties were booked solid for months in advance, while walk-in customers often had to wait for tables despite the restaurant's significantly larger capacity compared to the original diner. The animatronic shows drew applause and laughter from audiences who seemed never to tire of the characters' songs and jokes, while the arcade area provided additional entertainment for children who wanted to continue playing after the main shows had ended. Reviews in local and regional publications were universally positive, with critics praising the innovation, quality, and sheer joy that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza brought to family dining. Business magazines wrote feature articles about Emily and Afton's success, hailing them as pioneers in the family entertainment industry and predicting that their concept would inspire imitators across the country. The restaurant became a case study in business schools, an example of how technological innovation combined with understanding of customer desires could create extraordinary success. Behind the scenes, the partnership between Henry, Emily, and William Afton appeared to be functioning perfectly. Emily's technical genius ensured that the animatronics performed flawlessly day after day, while Afton's business management kept operations running smoothly and profitably. They complemented each other's strengths and seemed to share a genuine passion for creating experiences that would bring joy to families, their collaboration producing results that neither could have achieved alone. The restaurant's success created a ripple effect throughout the community, attracting other businesses to the area and contributing to local economic growth. Suppliers of food and equipment benefited from the high-volume orders, while the restaurant's popularity helped to establish the surrounding commercial district as a family-friendly destination. Property values in the area increased as families sought to live closer to the attractions their children loved, while competing restaurants began to incorporate their own forms of entertainment in attempts to capture some of Freddy Fazbear's success. The staff at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza were carefully selected and trained to maintain the high standards that Emily and Afton had established. Servers were taught to interact with children in ways that enhanced the magical atmosphere, while kitchen staff took pride in preparing food that would satisfy both adult palates and childhood preferences. The maintenance crews who kept the animatronics in perfect working order became skilled technicians, their expertise essential for ensuring that the complex mechanical performers could operate reliably show after show. As the months passed, and Freddy Fazbear's Pizza established itself as an unqualified success, plans for expansion began to take shape. Emily and Afton spoke of opening additional locations, each one bringing their unique brand of family entertainment to new communities. Franchise opportunities were discussed, with the potential for their concept to spread across state lines and eventually nationwide. The future seemed bright with unlimited possibilities, their dream of revolutionizing family entertainment appearing closer to reality with each passing day. Children who visited Freddy Fazbear's Pizza during this golden age would carry memories of wonder and joy for the rest of their lives. They would remember the thrill of seeing Freddy take the stage for the first time, the way Bonnie's guitar solos made them want to dance, and how Chica's enthusiasm for pizza made even the pickiest eaters eager to try new foods. The pirate tales that Foxy spun in his cove would fuel their imaginations long after they left the restaurant, while the arcade games provided challenges that they would practice for weeks between visits. Parents found themselves as enchanted as their children, marveling at the technological achievement while appreciating the genuine care that had been put into every aspect of the experience. The restaurant represented everything they hoped for in family entertainment: safe, wholesome, innovative, and capable of creating the kind of magical memories that would bind families together through shared joy and wonder. Yet even in this golden age of innocence and success, there were subtle signs that not everything was as perfect as it appeared. Some staff members occasionally noticed odd behavior from one of the owners, moments when William Afton's charm would slip to reveal something darker underneath. These incidents were rare and easily dismissed at the time. A sharp word here, an unsettling smile there, brief glimpses of a personality that didn't quite match the public persona he had carefully cultivated. The animatronics themselves, marvels of engineering though they were, occasionally exhibited glitches that their creators found difficult to explain, movements that seemed more fluid than their programming should have allowed, responses to stimuli that weren't part of their coded behaviors, and rare instances where their performances seemed almost too lifelike, as if something beyond mere technology was guiding their actions. These anomalies were dismissed as the growing pains of cutting-edge technology, minor quirks that would be resolved as the systems matured and were refined. The overwhelming success of the restaurant overshadowed any concerns, and the joy of the children who visited daily served as proof that whatever minor technical issues existed were insignificant compared to the magic being created within those walls. As 1985 dawned, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza stood at the pinnacle of its success, a shining example of what could be achieved when innovation met passion for creating joy. The restaurant had become more than a business. It had become an institution, a beloved part of the community that parents and children alike couldn't imagine living without. The future stretched ahead bright with promise, filled with plans for expansion and dreams of bringing even more wonder to families across the nation. Emily and Afton's partnership had created something truly special, a place where childhood dreams could come true and families could make memories that would last forever. Yet darkness was gathering at the edges of this bright world, shadows that would soon swallow the light and transform this paradise of childhood joy into something far more sinister. The golden age was drawing to a close, though none could yet see the storm clouds that were building on the horizon, threatening to destroy everything that had been so carefully built and cherished. In the shadows cast by Freddy Fazbear's tremendous success, where the laughter of children echoed through corridors lined with colorful posters and the cheerful melodies of animatronic performances filled the air with joy, there moved a figure whose very presence would come to represent the darkest aspects of human nature. William Afton stood as one of the restaurant's founding fathers, his name emblazoned on corporate documents, and his face familiar to staff and regular customers alike. Yet beneath the veneer of respectability and business acumen lay depths of darkness that defied comprehension. To those who knew him in his professional capacity, William Afton appeared to be the very model of entrepreneurial success. His partnership with Henry Emily had created something unprecedented in the world of family entertainment, and his business instincts had proven themselves time and again in the day-to-day operations of their growing empire. He possessed a natural charisma that made him effective in dealing with suppliers, investors, and the media representatives who frequently visited to document their innovative approach to dining and entertainment. Afton's public persona was carefully crafted and meticulously maintained, a mask of normalcy that concealed the true nature of the man who wore it. He could discuss profit margins and customer satisfaction surveys with the same enthusiasm that he brought to technical specifications and maintenance schedules, his versatility making him an invaluable partner in an enterprise that demanded expertise in multiple areas. Staff members who worked under his supervision found him to be demanding but fair, exacting in his standards but reasonable in his expectations. His family life appeared equally successful and conventional. William Afton was a husband and father, his household seemingly indistinguishable from countless others in their middle-class suburban community. His children attended local schools, participated in typical childhood activities, and showed no obvious signs of the dysfunction that might have hinted at the darkness that lurked within their father's heart. Neighbors who encountered the family at community events or in casual social situations would have described them as perfectly ordinary, perhaps even exemplary in their apparent stability and success. Yet those who looked more closely, who possessed the insight to read between the lines of carefully constructed normalcy, might have detected subtle signs that all was not as it appeared. There were moments when Afton's charm would falter, brief instances when his mask would slip to reveal glimpses of something far more disturbing underneath. These lapses were rare and quickly recovered from, but they suggested depths of character that remained hidden from casual observation. His relationship with the animatronic characters that formed the heart of their business revealed aspects of his personality that were simultaneously fascinating and deeply unsettling. While Henry Emily approached the mechanical performers with the affection of a creator for his artistic achievements, Afton's interests seemed to stem from different motivations entirely. He would spend long hours studying the robot's movements and behaviors, his observations extending far beyond what was necessary for maintenance or performance optimization. The technical specifications of the animatronics held a peculiar fascination for Afton, particularly those aspects that dealt with the character's ability to move and interact with their environment. He would question Emily extensively about the mechanical systems that powered their movements, the electronic circuits that controlled their responses, and most intriguingly, the theoretical limits of what such systems might be capable of achieving under different circumstances. His interest in the restaurant's security systems was equally intense and somewhat unusual for someone whose primary responsibilities lay in business management rather than operational security. Afton had insisted on being involved in the design and installation of the surveillance equipment, claiming that his background made him uniquely qualified to identify potential vulnerabilities that might be exploited by troublemakers or competitors seeking to steal their proprietary technology. The security cameras that monitored the dining areas, kitchen, and backstage regions were positioned according to specifications that Afton had personally approved, their coverage patterns reflecting his detailed understanding of the restaurant's layout and traffic flow. He maintained master keys to all areas of the building and possessed override codes for electronic locks and access controls, his comprehensive access justified by his ownership stake and management responsibilities. Staff members occasionally noticed that Afton would arrive at the restaurant during off hours, his presence explained by the need to handle administrative tasks or oversee maintenance activities that were best performed when customers weren't present. These visits became more frequent over time, and some employees began to wonder why so much after-hours work seemed to require the personal attention of one of the owners rather than being delegated to appropriate department heads or supervisors. The spring Bonnie costume that hung in the parts and service area held a particular fascination for William Afton, though his interest in the vintage animatronic suit seemed to go beyond mere nostalgia for the early days of their business partnership. The Golden Rabbit costume was a relic from the Fredbear's Family Diner era, one of the original spring-lock suits that had allowed performers to wear the animatronic characters and interact directly with customers in ways that stationary robots could not. Spring-lock technology represented one of the most ambitious and dangerous innovations in early animatronic design, a system that allowed the mechanical components of a costume to be compressed and locked into position so that a human performer could safely wear the suit. When activated, the spring locks would hold the animatronic parts away from the wearer's body, creating enough internal space for a person to move comfortably while presenting the external appearance of the character to audiences. The inherent dangers of spring-lock suits had led to their gradual abandonment in favor of safer alternatives, but Afton seemed drawn to both the technology and the specific costume that embodied it. He would often be found examining the spring Bonnie suit during quiet moments, his hands tracing the mechanical components with a familiarity that suggested extensive study of its construction and operation. His knowledge of the suit's capabilities extended far beyond what would be expected from someone whose primary role involved business management rather than technical operations. Afton understood the precise sequence of actions required to safely engage and disengage the spring lock mechanisms, the potential failure modes that could result in catastrophic malfunction, and the modifications that might be made to improve or alter the suit's performance characteristics. The psychological profile that began to emerge from careful observation of William Afton's behavior patterns revealed a complex individual whose surface normalcy concealed profound disturbances that would have alarmed anyone who fully understood their implications. His fascination with control extended beyond business operations into areas that seemed to serve no practical purpose, suggesting motivations that were more personal than professional. Afton displayed an unusual interest in the boundary between life and death, consciousness and unconsciousness, animation and stillness. His conversations with Emily about the animatronics often veered into philosophical territory, exploring questions about what it meant for something to be truly alive and whether consciousness could exist in forms other than biological ones. These discussions might have seemed like innocent, intellectual curiosity to anyone who didn't recognize the underlying patterns of thought they revealed. His relationship with children was another area where careful observation revealed troubling undercurrents beneath an apparently normal surface. While his public interactions with young customers were always appropriate and professional, there was something in his manner that suggested a level of attention and interest that went beyond what was necessary for effective customer service or business relationship building. Afton would often volunteer to handle situations involving lost children or behavioral problems, positioning himself as the primary point of contact between the restaurant's management and its youngest customers. His explanations for this involvement always sounded reasonable. He claimed to have a natural rapport with children and believed that personal attention from ownership demonstrated the restaurant's commitment to customer service, but the pattern of behavior suggested motivations that were less benign than they appeared. The staff members who worked most closely with Afton began to notice subtle changes in his behavior as the months passed and the restaurant's success continued to grow. Success, rather than satisfying whatever drove him, seemed to intensify certain aspects of his personality that had previously been kept under tighter control. Power and access were revealing their true effects on someone whose fundamental nature was perhaps incompatible with the responsibilities he had been given. His perfectionism, which had initially been an asset in building and maintaining a successful business, began to manifest in ways that seemed excessive and potentially problematic. Afton would become fixated on minor details of restaurant operations, spending disproportionate amounts of time and energy on issues that other managers would have delegated or addressed through standard procedures. The control he exercised over various aspects of the restaurant's operations became increasingly comprehensive and difficult for others to challenge or modify. Afton had positioned himself as the final authority on numerous decisions that would normally have been handled through collaborative management or delegated to appropriate specialists, creating a concentration of power that was both unusual and potentially dangerous. His interest in the restaurant's customer base took on characteristics that seemed to go beyond normal business intelligence gathering. Afton maintained detailed records of regular customers, their visit patterns, their family compositions, and their behavioral characteristics, information that he claimed was essential for marketing and customer service purposes, but which seemed excessive in its scope and detail. The birthday parties that formed such an important part of Freddy Fazbear's business model received particular attention from Afton, who insisted on personally reviewing guest lists and maintaining detailed records of which children attended which events. His explanations for this involvement centered on quality control and customer satisfaction, but the level of personal attention he devoted to tracking individual children raised questions about his true motivations. As 1984 gave way to 1985, The changes in William Afton's behavior became more pronounced and more difficult for those around him to rationalize or ignore. The success of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had provided him with unprecedented access to children and families, opportunities that someone with his particular psychological makeup might view as something other than business advantages. The restaurant's layout and security systems, which he had been instrumental in designing, created numerous opportunities for private interaction with customers away from the observation of other staff members or parents. The backstage areas, parts and service rooms, and administrative offices formed a network of spaces that were accessible to someone with master keys and override codes, but which remained largely invisible to casual visitors. His familiarity with the animatronic characters and their operating systems gave him unique insights into how the restaurant functioned during both operating hours and the quiet periods when maintenance and preparation activities took place. This knowledge, combined with his access to security systems and his authority to be present in the building at any time, created a situation where Afton possessed capabilities that extended far beyond what would normally be expected or appropriate for someone in his position. The Spring Bonnie costume continued to hold a particular fascination for him, its golden fur and cheerful expression masking the complex mechanical systems that could transform it from a simple costume into something much more sinister. In the hands of someone who understood its capabilities and limitations, the suit could serve purposes that its original designers had never intended or imagined. The psychological transformation that was occurring within William Afton was not visible to those around him, hidden beneath layers of carefully maintained normalcy and professional competence. Yet the foundations of his moral restraint were eroding, worn away by whatever forces drove his obsessions and fed his darkening desires. The success of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had given him everything he might have wanted in terms of financial security, professional recognition, and social standing. Yet these achievements seemed only to intensify his hunger for something else, something that could not be obtained through legitimate means or satisfied through normal channels. The children who visited the restaurant represented more than customers to William Afton. They had become objects of a fascination that was growing stronger with each passing day. Their trust, their innocence, their vulnerability, all of these characteristics that made them perfect customers for a family restaurant, also made them perfect victims for someone whose intentions had begun to stray far from the wholesome entertainment that Freddy Fazbear's was supposed to provide. The stage was being set for tragedy, though none could yet see the signs that were accumulating like storm clouds on the horizon. William Afton's descent into darkness was accelerating, driven by compulsions that he was increasingly unable or unwilling to resist. The restaurant that had been built as a monument to childhood joy was about to become the setting for horrors that would transform its meaning forever. The golden age of innocence was drawing to a close, and the architect of shadows was preparing to begin his terrible work. The children who played in the dining room and laughed at the animatronic performances had no way of knowing that their paradise was about to become a hunting ground, or that the friendly businessman who sometimes stopped to chat with them was studying them with the cold calculation of a predator selecting his prey. The transformation from creator to destroyer was nearly complete, and William Afton was ready to cross the final boundary that separated him from the unthinkable acts that would define his legacy and doom countless innocent souls to fates worse than death itself. June 26, 1985, dawned as countless other summer days had in the suburban community that surrounded Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, with golden sunlight streaming through kitchen windows, where mothers prepared breakfast and fathers checked their watches before heading off to work. Children across the neighborhood stirred in their beds with the anticipation that only summer vacation could bring. their minds already racing with possibilities for adventure and play. Yet this day, which began with such innocent promise, would become a watershed moment in the history of childhood horror. The day when 5 young lights would be extinguished forever, and the very concept of safety would be shattered within the walls of what had been considered the most wholesome establishment in town. The morning brought an atmosphere of celebration to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, as the restaurant prepared to host what should have been one of its most joyous occasions, a birthday party for a young patron whose family had chosen the establishment specifically because of its reputation for creating magical memories. The staff arrived early to ensure that every detail would be perfect, from the carefully arranged decorations to the special birthday cake that would serve as the centerpiece of the celebration. Gabriel Martinez was among the first children to arrive that morning, his dark eyes bright with excitement as he practically bounced through the entrance doors beside his parents. At 7 years old, he possessed the kind of infectious enthusiasm that made him a natural leader among his peers. Always the first to suggest new games, and the last to give up when challenges seemed insurmountable. His love for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza bordered on obsession, and he had been looking forward to this particular birthday party for weeks, having heard from friends that the birthday child would receive special attention from the animatronic performers themselves. Gabriel's fascination with the restaurant extended beyond the entertainment and food to encompass every aspect of the establishment's operations. He would spend long minutes studying the animatronics during their performances, trying to understand how they moved and sang with such lifelike precision. His parents often joked that he knew the timing of every show by heart and could predict exactly when Freddy would remove his hat or when Bonnie would launch into his famous guitar solo. The boy's natural curiosity and fearless nature made him popular with both children and adults, his genuine enthusiasm for life creating connections wherever he went. Teachers at his school described him as a born leader who could organize playground games and settle disputes with equal skill, while neighbors knew him as the polite young man who always offered to help carry groceries or walk their dogs. Jeremy Fitzgerald arrived shortly after Gabriel, his quiet demeanor and gentle nature creating an interesting contrast to the more boisterous energy of his friend. At 6 years old, Jeremy possessed an old soul that seemed to understand emotions and situations with a wisdom beyond his years. He was the child who would comfort classmates when they were upset, who would share his lunch with anyone who seemed hungry, and who would always choose kindness over personal advantage in any situation that required such decisions. Jeremy's love for music had drawn him to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza initially, his fascination with Bonnie's guitar performances inspiring him to beg his parents for music lessons. He could often be found humming the melodies he had heard during previous visits, his pitch-perfect recall of complex songs amazing adults who witnessed his unconscious performances. His dream was to someday play guitar just like Bonnie, and he had been practicing on a small acoustic instrument that his parents had given him for his most recent birthday. The boy's sensitive nature made him particularly attuned to the feelings of others, and he had developed friendships with children across a wide range of ages and backgrounds. His inclusive approach to play meant that no child was ever left out when Jeremy was organizing activities, and his gentle coaching helped more timid peers find the confidence to participate in group games and social situations. Susie Johnson bounded through the restaurant's entrance with the kind of boundless energy that only 5-year-old girls seem capable of generating, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she ran toward the dining area where the birthday celebration would take place. Her natural ebullience and sunny disposition made her a favorite among the restaurant's staff, who would often comment on her infectious laughter and the way she seemed to brighten every room she entered. Susie's relationship with Chica the chicken was particularly special, the little girl having declared the yellow animatronic to be her absolute favorite from the moment of her first visit to the restaurant. She would mimic Chica's mannerisms during the shows, clapping along with perfect timing and singing backup vocals with enthusiasm that more than compensated for any lack of technical precision. Her parents had learned to schedule their visits around showtimes, knowing that Susie would be devastated if she missed any of Chica's performances. The little girl's love for pizza was legendary among her family and friends. Her ability to consume entire slices that seemed far too large for someone of her size, amusing adults, and inspiring envy among her peers. She would often declare that she wanted to work at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza when she grew up, specifically so that she could eat pizza every day and spend time with her beloved Chica. Fritz Smith arrived at the party with the kind of swagger that marked him as the adventurer of the group, his 7-year-old confidence evident in every step as he surveyed the restaurant with the air of someone who considered himself an expert on all matters related to Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. His fascination with Foxy the Pirate Fox had led him to develop an extensive knowledge of pirate lore, and he could recite sea shanties and adventure stories with the enthusiasm of someone who truly believed he had been born in the wrong century. Fritz's bold nature and love of excitement made him the child most likely to suggest exploring areas of the restaurant that were typically off-limits to customers. His curiosity about the behind-the-scenes operations driving him to ask endless questions about how the animatronics worked and where they went when they weren't performing. His parents had learned to keep a close eye on him during restaurant visits, knowing that his adventurous spirit might lead him to wander into areas where he didn't belong. The boy's leadership qualities were evident in his ability to organize elaborate games of pirates and treasure hunters, complete with detailed storylines and character assignments that could keep groups of children entertained for hours. His natural charisma and storytelling abilities made him popular with peers who looked to him for direction when their own imaginations needed inspiration. The 5th child to join the group that morning was Cassidy, a quiet 6-year-old whose dark hair framed a face that seemed to hold secrets and wisdom far beyond her years. Unlike the other children, whose enthusiasm for the restaurant was immediately obvious, Cassidy's appreciation for Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was more subdued and complex, her enjoyment stemming from careful observation of details that others might overlook. Cassidy possessed an almost supernatural ability to notice things that escaped the attention of adults and children alike, her quiet presence often going unnoticed, while she absorbed information about her surroundings with the thoroughness of a professional investigator. She had developed a particular interest in Golden Freddy, the mysterious 5th animatronic whose appearances were rare and unpredictable, making him all the more fascinating to a child who appreciated puzzles and hidden meanings. The little girl's serious nature and tendency towards solitary reflection sometimes made it difficult for her to connect with more outgoing peers. But the children who took the time to know her discovered a loyal friend whose insights and observations could add depth and meaning to their shared experiences. Her parents worried that she was too mature for her age, but they also recognized that her unique perspective was a gift that would serve her well as she navigated the complexities of growing up. As the morning progressed and more families arrived for the birthday celebration, the restaurant filled with the familiar sounds of childhood joy and anticipation. Parents settled into booths and tables while children gravitated toward the main stage, where Freddy and his band would soon begin their first show of the day. The arcade area buzzed with electronic sounds as older children tested their skills against the various games, while younger ones pressed their faces against the glass of the prize counter to examine the treasures that could be won through sufficient dedication and skill. The birthday party itself unfolded according to the well-established traditions that had made Freddy Fazbear's Pizza famous for creating magical memories. The birthday child was given a special hat and seated at a table positioned for optimal viewing of the animatronic performances, while friends and family members gathered around to share in the celebration. The restaurant staff moved with practiced efficiency, ensuring that food orders were taken and delivered promptly while maintaining the festive atmosphere that was essential to the establishment's success. William Afton moved through the restaurant that morning with his usual professional demeanor, greeting families and checking on various operational details with the dedication that had made him respected among both staff and customers. To casual observers, he appeared to be simply fulfilling his responsibilities as one of the restaurant's owners, ensuring that the day's events would proceed smoothly and that customer satisfaction would remain at the high levels that had become the establishment's trademark. Yet beneath this facade of normal business operations, something far more sinister was taking place. Afton's attention was focused not on profit margins or customer service metrics, but on the 5 children who had captured his interest through a combination of characteristics that fed into his darkening obsessions. Each child represented something that called to the twisted desires that had been growing within him, their innocence and vulnerability making them perfect targets for the horrific plans that had been forming in the shadows of his corrupted mind. The spring Bonnie costume hung in the parts and service room like a golden sentinel, its cheerful expression masking the terrible purpose for which it would soon be employed. Afton had spent countless hours studying the suit's mechanisms and limitations, ensuring that he could don and operate it with the confidence necessary for what he intended to accomplish. The spring-lock technology that allowed the costume to accommodate a human wearer would serve as the perfect disguise, transforming him from a recognizable adult authority figure into a beloved character that children would naturally trust and follow. As the first animatronic show of the day concluded and families began to settle into the rhythm of celebration and dining, Afton began to implement the plan that would transform June 26, 1985, from a day of joy into a date that would forever be associated with unthinkable horror. His knowledge of the restaurant's layout and security systems gave him advantages that no outsider could have possessed, while his position of authority ensured that his movements would not be questioned by staff members who had been trained to respect his decisions and follow his instructions. The first phase of his plan involved isolating individual children from the larger group, a process that required patience, timing, and the kind of psychological manipulation that Afton had been unconsciously practicing throughout his interactions with young customers. He understood intuitively how to exploit the natural curiosity and trust that made children such delightful customers under normal circumstances, turning these same qualities into vulnerabilities that could be leveraged for his own twisted purposes. Gabriel Martinez, with his natural leadership qualities and adventurous spirit, became the first target of Afton's carefully orchestrated campaign. The boy's fascination with the animatronics and his desire to understand their inner workings provided the perfect opening for someone who could offer exclusive access to behind-the-scenes areas that were normally forbidden to customers. When the Golden Spring Bonnie character approached Gabriel during a quiet moment between shows, suggesting that he would enjoy seeing how the robots really worked, the boy's excitement overcame any caution that might have protected him. The parts and service room that Afton led Gabriel to was a place of mechanical wonder and industrial functionality, filled with spare components, maintenance equipment, and the various tools necessary to keep the animatronic performers in perfect working order. To a child fascinated by how things worked, it represented a treasure trove of information and discovery, the kind of exclusive experience that would be worth bragging about to friends for years to come. What happened in that room, away from the surveillance cameras and beyond the reach of help, would forever remain a secret known only to the perpetrator and his victim. The details of Gabriel's final moments are mercifully lost to time, though the transformation of an enthusiastic 7-year-old into the first casualty of William Afton's descent into absolute evil marked a turning point from which there could be no return. Jeremy Fitzgerald's gentle nature and trusting disposition made him particularly susceptible to the kind of manipulation that Afton had perfected through his interactions with countless children over the months of Freddy Fazbear's operation. When the Spring Bonnie character approached the quiet 6-year-old with promises of a special musical performance that only the most deserving children were allowed to witness, Jeremy's love of music overrode any instincts that might have warned him of danger. The soundproofed storage area where Jeremy met his fate had been chosen specifically for its isolation from the main restaurant areas, its walls designed to contain the noise of maintenance equipment and repair activities. The boy's final moments were marked not by the music he loved so much, but by the silence that followed his encounter with a monster wearing the costume of a beloved character. Susie Johnson's boundless energy and innocent enthusiasm made her the kind of child who would naturally follow a friendly character who promised to show her something special about her favorite pizza restaurant. When Spring Bonnie suggested that Chica the chicken wanted to meet her privately, that the yellow animatronic had requested this special visit because Susie was such a devoted fan, the 5-year-old's excitement made her vulnerable to the predator who had been studying her behavioral patterns and emotional attachments. The maintenance corridor where Susie's story came to its tragic end was a place where the cheerful facade of the restaurant gave way to the industrial reality of keeping a complex entertainment venue operational. The contrast between her joyful expectations and the horror that awaited her in that sterile, utilitarian space represented the complete inversion of everything that Freddy Fazbear's Pizza was supposed to represent. Fritz Smith's adventurous spirit and love of pirate adventures made him the perfect target for someone who could promise access to exclusive areas and hidden secrets that would satisfy his curiosity about the restaurant's paid operations. When the Golden Rabbit character suggested that there were real pirate treasures hidden in the back rooms, that Foxy had left special prizes for his most dedicated fans, Fritz's excitement overrode any caution that might have protected him from what was to come. The storage facility where Fritz met his end was filled with costumes, props, and equipment related to the restaurant's various entertainment programs, creating an environment that should have been magical for a child who loved adventure stories and pirate lore. Instead, it became the site where childhood wonder was transformed into ultimate horror, where dreams of adventure gave way to the nightmare of reality. Cassidy's quiet nature and tendency towards solitary exploration made her encounter with the Spring Bonnie character different from the others, her natural wariness creating a dynamic that required more sophisticated manipulation. When the costumed figure suggested that she had been chosen to receive answers to the mysteries that she had been quietly investigating, that the secrets of Golden Freddy would be revealed to someone who had proven herself worthy through careful observation, her intellectual curiosity became the key that unlocked her trust. The office space where Cassidy's story reached its terrible conclusion was filled with documents, records, and administrative materials that spoke to the business side of the restaurant's operations. For a child who noticed details that others missed, it should have been a fascinating glimpse behind the corporate veil, a chance to understand how her favorite entertainment venue really functioned. Instead, it became the setting for the final act in a tragedy that would haunt the establishment forever. By the time the birthday party began to wind down and families started to gather their belongings and prepare for departure, 5 children had vanished from the celebration without anyone initially noticing their absence. The chaos and excitement of a large gathering, combined with the assumption that children were simply exploring different areas of the restaurant or visiting the restrooms, created a window of opportunity that Afton had exploited with cold efficiency. The first indications that something was wrong came when parents began looking for their children as the party officially ended and families prepared to leave. The initial search was casual and unworried, based on the assumption that the missing children had simply wandered off to play arcade games, or had become so engrossed in the animatronic performances that they had lost track of time. As minutes turned into a quarter hour, and then longer, the casual search became more organized and urgent. Staff members were enlisted to check restrooms, storage areas, and any other locations where children might reasonably be found. The restaurant's layout, with its multiple dining areas, arcade sections, and performance spaces, provided numerous places where children could potentially be located, but systematic searching failed to locate any of the 5 missing youngsters. The realization that 5 children had simultaneously vanished from a supervised birthday party in a secure restaurant environment created a level of panic and confusion that the staff of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had never experienced before. Parents who had been enjoying a pleasant afternoon of family entertainment suddenly found themselves confronting every parent's worst nightmare: the possibility that their children had somehow come to harm in what had been considered one of the safest environments in the community. Law enforcement was summoned as the search expanded beyond the restaurant itself to include the parking lot, adjacent businesses, and any other locations where the children might have gone. The responding officers found themselves dealing with a situation that defied easy explanation, as 5 children had somehow disappeared from a crowded restaurant without anyone witnessing their departure or noting anything unusual about their behavior. The investigation that followed would consume countless hours and involve numerous agencies, but it would ultimately fail to uncover the truth about what had happened within the walls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza on that tragic summer afternoon. The children's bodies, hidden within the restaurant itself in locations that would not be discovered for years, remained silent witnesses to crimes that exceeded the imagination of those charged with uncovering the truth. William Afton, meanwhile, continued to play his role as the concerned business owner and community leader, expressing appropriate shock and dismay at the tragedy that had befallen his establishment. His cooperation with law enforcement was complete and seemingly sincere. His access to all areas of the restaurant and his detailed knowledge of its operations, making him invaluable to investigators who were struggling to understand how such a thing could have occurred. The golden spring Bonnie costume was returned to its storage location, cleaned and maintained according to standard procedures, its cheerful expression betraying nothing of the horrors it had witnessed and facilitated. The mechanical components that had made it possible for a human to wear the suit functioned exactly as designed, their spring-lock mechanisms operating with the precision that had made them marvels of engineering achievement. As night fell over the community, and the search for the missing children continued under artificial lights, the restaurant that had been a symbol of childhood joy and family togetherness had been transformed into something else entirely. The animatronic performers stood silent on their stage, their cheerful expressions unchanged by the tragedy that had unfolded around them, their mechanical hearts incapable of comprehending the horror that had taken place within their domain. The 5 children whose laughter had filled the restaurant that morning would never laugh again, their voices silenced by a monster who had hidden among them wearing the costume of a beloved character. Their stories had come to an end in the back rooms and storage areas of a place that was supposed to represent everything good and wholesome about childhood entertainment, their final moments, witnessed only by someone whose humanity had been entirely consumed by darkness. June 26, 1985, would be remembered not as a day of celebration but as the beginning of a nightmare that would haunt Freddy Fazbear's Pizza for decades to come. The missing children incident, as it would come to be known, had transformed a place of magic into a monument to evil, ensuring that the names Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy would be forever associated with one of the most heinous crimes in the history of family entertainment. The golden age of innocence was over, and the age of horror had begun. In the moments following the unspeakable acts that had claimed 5 innocent lives within the walls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, something began to stir in the liminal spaces between the physical and spiritual realms, a phenomenon that defied every law of nature and challenged the very foundations of what rational minds believed possible. The children who had been murdered in those sterile backrooms and maintenance corridors did not simply cease to exist as their bodies fell silent. Instead, their consciousness, their very essence, remained tethered to the mortal plane by bonds forged from trauma, confusion, and a desperate refusal to accept the finality of death. Gabriel Martinez, whose 7-year-old mind had been filled with wonder and curiosity right up until his final moments, found himself existing in a state that bore no resemblance to anything he had ever experienced or imagined. Death, as he discovered, was not the peaceful sleep that adults had described when his grandfather had passed away the previous year, nor was it the simple cessation of awareness that his young intellect might have anticipated. Instead, he remained conscious, aware, and desperately confused about what had happened to him and why the world around him had suddenly become so strange and frightening. The transition from life to whatever came after was not instantaneous, but rather a gradual process that unfolded over hours and days as the child's spirit struggled to comprehend the reality of his situation. Gabriel could still see the restaurant around him, still hear the sounds of ongoing operations and investigations, but he discovered that he could no longer interact with the physical world in the ways that had previously defined his existence. His attempts to call out to the searchers who passed through the areas where his body lay hidden went unheard. His efforts to touch objects or people met with the frustrating inability to affect anything in the material realm. The overwhelming sense of confusion and disorientation that marked Gabriel's early experiences as a spirit was compounded by the gradual realization that he was not alone in his predicament. 4 other presences moved through the restaurant's corridors and rooms, each carrying the distinctive emotional signature of a child who had suffered the same fate that had befallen him. Jeremy's gentle soul radiated waves of bewilderment and sorrow, while Susie's bright spirit flickered with alternating moments of fear and defiant anger. Fritz's adventurous nature had not been diminished by death, and his ghostly presence maintained the same bold curiosity that had characterized his living personality, though now it was tinged with a desperate need to understand what had happened to him and his friends. Cassidy's spirit, perhaps due to her naturally observant nature, seemed to adapt more quickly to their altered state of existence, her consciousness already beginning to explore the boundaries and possibilities of their new reality. The 5 spirits found themselves drawn to each other not just by shared experience, but by some fundamental force that seemed to recognize their common bond of victimhood and loss. Their communication did not rely on spoken words or physical gestures, but rather on a direct sharing of thoughts and emotions that was both more intimate and more immediate than anything they had experienced while alive. Through this mysterious connection, they began to piece together the truth of what had been done to them and by whom. The identity of their murderer was not immediately apparent to the children's spirits, as the Spring Bonnie costume had effectively concealed William Afton's true identity during his heinous acts. However, their supernatural awareness gradually began to penetrate the deceptions that had fooled them in life, revealing glimpses of the man who had destroyed their mortal existence while wearing the guise of a beloved character. As the days passed and the investigation into their disappearances continued above them, the 5 spirits began to experience changes in their spiritual essence that seemed to be driven by the powerful emotions that their traumatic deaths had generated. Anger, confusion, and a desperate desire for justice created currents of energy that flowed through their consciousness like electrical storms, building in intensity as they watched their families grieve and their murderer continue to move freely through the world that he had stolen from them. The restaurant's animatronic performers, those magnificent mechanical creations that had brought so much joy to countless children, began to exhibit subtle changes in their behavior that reflected the supernatural forces now present within the establishment. The spirits of the murdered children found themselves inexplicably drawn to these robotic entertainers, sensing within their circuits and servos a potential for connection that transcended the normal boundaries between the living and the mechanical. Freddy Fazbear himself, the brown bear who served as the leader of the animatronic band, became the focal point for Gabriel's spiritual energy. The child's natural leadership qualities and his fascination with the restaurant's technology created a resonance between his consciousness and the complex systems that controlled the robotic performer. At first, this connection manifested as minor glitches and anomalies in Freddy's programming, subtle changes in timing and behavior that the restaurant's technicians attributed to normal wear and the stress of continuous operation. Jeremy's gentle soul found itself drawn to Bonnie the Bunny, the blue guitarist whose musical performances had captured the sensitive child's imagination during his living visits to the restaurant. The boy's love of music created harmonics between his spiritual essence and the audio systems that gave Bonnie his voice, resulting in occasional variations in the robot's songs that seemed to carry emotional undertones beyond what the original programming had intended. Susie's bright spirit, still radiating the enthusiasm and love of life that had characterized her personality, formed a connection with Chica, the chicken, that was both beautiful and tragic in its implications. The 5-year-old's adoration for the yellow animatronic created a bond that transcended death, her consciousness beginning to merge with the systems that controlled Chica's movements and vocalizations. The result was a subtle but noticeable increase in the character's apparent affection for young customers, particularly little girls who reminded the watching spirit of her own lost childhood. Fritz's adventurous nature and love of pirate stories drew his consciousness toward Foxy, the pirate fox, the red animatronic whose theatrical performances in Pirates Cove had always been the 7-year-old's favorite part of any restaurant visit. The boy's bold personality and his fascination with swashbuckling adventures created resonances within Foxy's programming that manifested as increasingly dramatic and emotionally charged performances. Though the audiences who witnessed these enhanced shows had no way of understanding the tragic source of their improved entertainment, Cassidy's mysterious and observant nature led her spirit toward a different connection entirely, one that would prove to be far more complex and significant than the bonds formed by her 4 companions. Rather than attaching herself to one of the main animatronic performers, her consciousness was drawn to the enigmatic Golden Freddy, a mysterious 5th character whose appearances had always been rare and unpredictable, even before the tragedy that had claimed her life. Golden Freddy represented something different from the other animatronic characters, a presence that seemed to exist on the boundary between the mechanical and the supernatural, even under normal circumstances. The bear's golden coloring and elusive nature had always suggested connections to forces beyond the purely technological, and Cassidy's spirit found in this mysterious character a vessel that could accommodate her particular combination of wisdom, determination, and supernatural awareness. The process by which the children's spirits merged with the animatronic systems was not instantaneous, but rather unfolded gradually over weeks and months, as their consciousness learned to interface with circuits and servos in ways that the original designers had never anticipated or intended. This supernatural possession represented a fundamental violation of the natural order, a bridging of the gap between organic consciousness and mechanical systems that should have been impossible under any rational understanding of reality. Yet the trauma of their deaths and the intensity of their emotional bonds to the restaurant had created conditions that transcended normal limitations, allowing their spirits to inhabit and animate machines that had previously been nothing more than sophisticated entertainment devices. The animatronics, once merely programmed to perform predetermined routines, began to exhibit genuine consciousness as the children's souls brought true awareness to their mechanical forms. The experience of existing within robotic bodies was profoundly disorienting for the murdered children, whose spiritual essence had to adapt to sensory inputs and motor responses that bore little resemblance to their original human physiology. Vision through optical sensors created a different quality of sight than biological eyes had provided, while movement through servo motors and mechanical joints required learning entirely new methods of coordination and control. Sound perception through electronic audio pickups allowed them to hear conversations and activities throughout the restaurant in ways that their human ears had never permitted, creating an awareness of the establishment's operations that was both comprehensive and overwhelming. They could monitor multiple conversations simultaneously, track the movements of staff and customers through different areas of the building, and detect subtle changes in the restaurant's acoustic environment that revealed information about maintenance activities, security procedures, and operational schedules. The children's possession of the animatronic performers also granted them access to the restaurant's internal systems in ways that provided unprecedented insight into the establishment's daily operations. Through connections to the central computer network, they could observe security camera feeds, monitor environmental controls, and access databases containing information about customers, employees, and business activities that would have been completely invisible to them during their living visits. This expanded awareness brought with it a growing understanding of the scope and nature of the evil that had destroyed their lives. As they observed William Afton continuing to move through the restaurant with the same charming facade that had enabled him to commit his terrible crimes, the children's spirits, now possessed of supernatural capabilities and freed from the physical limitations that had made them vulnerable in life, began to develop plans for confronting their murderer and achieving the justice that the legal system had failed to provide. Their initial attempts at supernatural manifestation were crude and unfocused, limited to minor anomalies in the animatronic performances and occasional malfunctions in electronic systems that served more to confuse and unnerve staff members than to accomplish any specific objectives. The learning curve associated with controlling complex robotic systems while maintaining coherent consciousness proved steeper than their young minds had anticipated, requiring patience and practice that was difficult to maintain while consumed with anger and desire for revenge. Gabriel's spirit, channeling his natural leadership qualities through Freddy's systems, gradually learned to coordinate the actions of his four companions, their shared consciousness, allowing for a level of cooperation that transcended their individual capabilities. Through trial and error, they discovered how to manipulate the restaurant's lighting systems, sound equipment, and even the animatronic performers themselves in ways that could create atmosphere and effects beyond what the original programming had ever envisioned. The first significant manifestation of their combined supernatural abilities occurred during a routine birthday party several weeks after their deaths, when the accumulated anger and frustration of 5 murdered children reached a critical threshold that allowed them to temporarily override the normal constraints of the animatronic systems. The result was a performance that departed dramatically from the cheerful, family-friendly entertainment that customers expected, with songs that carried undertones of menace and movements that suggested awareness and intelligence beyond mere mechanical programming. Staff members who witnessed this unusual performance found themselves deeply unsettled by what they had observed, though they struggled to articulate exactly what had been different or disturbing about the animatronic's behavior. The technical crew who examined the robots after the incident found no evidence of mechanical malfunction or programming errors, leaving them with the uncomfortable conclusion that the anomalous performance had emerged from causes that their expertise could not identify or address. Customer reactions to the increasingly strange behavior of the animatronic performers varied widely, with some families expressing concern about the changes they observed while others remained oblivious to anything unusual. Children, with their greater sensitivity to supernatural phenomena and their willingness to accept experiences that adults might dismiss as impossible, often served as the most reliable witnesses to the manifestations of the murdered children's consciousness. Young customers began reporting conversations with the animatronic performers that seemed to go beyond their programmed responses, interactions that suggested genuine understanding and emotional connection rather than mere mechanical repetition. Some children claimed that Freddy had spoken to them about feelings of sadness and anger, while others reported that Chica had asked them questions about their families and experiences that demonstrated impossible knowledge of their personal lives. These reports, when brought to the attention of adults, were typically dismissed as the products of overactive childhood imagination, combined with the sophisticated entertainment technology that made the animatronic performances so compelling. Parents and staff members found it easier to rationalize away the supernatural elements of these accounts rather than confront the implications of what their children were describing. The murdered children's spirits, meanwhile, continued to develop their supernatural abilities and their understanding of how to manipulate the physical world through their animatronic hosts. They learned to coordinate their actions across multiple robots simultaneously, creating complex performances and interactions that required a level of planning and cooperation that no programming could have achieved. Their growing mastery of the restaurant's systems allowed them to access information about customers, staff members, and operational procedures that they used to build comprehensive profiles of everyone who entered their domain. This intelligence gathering was driven by their desperate search for their murderer, whose identity remained partially concealed behind the Spring Bonnie costume that had facilitated his crimes. The children's supernatural awareness gradually began to penetrate the deceptions and false identities that William Afton had constructed around himself, revealing glimpses of his true nature and his continued presence within the restaurant. Their recognition of him was not immediate or complete, but rather developed incrementally as they observed his behavior patterns, studied his interactions with staff and customers, and compared their fragmentary memories of their final moments with the evidence of his ongoing activities. As their understanding of Afton's identity solidified, the murdered children's desire for justice and revenge began to manifest in increasingly direct and aggressive supernatural activities. The animatronic performers under their control started to exhibit behaviors that seemed specifically designed to unnerve and threaten adults who resembled their murderer, while maintaining their cheerful interactions with innocent children who posed no threat. The restaurant's security systems, compromised by the children's supernatural influence, began to malfunction in ways that created opportunities for the possessed animatronics to move freely through the establishment during hours when they should have been inactive. Staff members who worked late shifts or arrived early for opening procedures reported encounters with the robotic performers in locations and circumstances that should have been impossible under normal operating conditions. The five spirits had found their vessels, their mechanical bodies that would serve as instruments of their will in a world that had failed to protect them in life. Through circuits and servos, through optical sensors and audio systems, they would continue their existence as something between the living and the dead, forever bound to the place where their mortal lives had ended and their supernatural journey had begun. Their transformation from innocent children into possessed animatronic performers represented a fundamental violation of the natural order, a bridging of realms that should never have been possible. Yet their love for the restaurant that had been their final destination, combined with their desperate need for justice and their refusal to accept the finality of death had created the conditions necessary for their consciousness to survive and adapt to forms that could interact with the physical world in ways their spirits alone could never have achieved. The binding of souls to steel and circuitry was complete, and the haunted legacy of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had truly begun. The morning of June 27th, 1985, brought with it an atmosphere of barely controlled chaos as law enforcement agencies descended upon Freddy Fazbear's Pizza with a determination born from the gravity of 5 simultaneous child disappearances. Detective Sarah Chen, a 15-year veteran of the police force, who had built her reputation on methodical investigation techniques and an unwavering commitment to uncovering truth, found herself confronting a case that would challenge every assumption she had developed about criminal behavior and investigative procedure. The initial response to the missing children reports had followed standard protocols established for such emergencies, with uniformed officers securing the scene while detectives began the painstaking process of interviewing witnesses and documenting evidence. Yet the sheer impossibility of what appeared to have occurred, 5 children vanishing simultaneously from a crowded restaurant without anyone noticing their departure, created investigative challenges that exceeded anything in Detective Chen's considerable experience. The restaurant itself became a maze of potential evidence and false leads. Its multiple dining areas, arcade sections, and backstage regions offering countless locations where children might have gone or where evidence of their fate might be hidden. Every surface was photographed and examined for fingerprints. Every trash receptacle was emptied and searched for clues, and every staff member was interviewed multiple times as investigators struggled to construct a timeline that could explain the impossible. William Afton's cooperation with the investigation was exemplary from the beginning, his demeanor reflecting appropriate shock and concern, while his intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations made him an invaluable resource for officers trying to understand the layout and security systems of the Fon's establishment. He provided detailed floor plans that highlighted every room and corridor, explained the function and access procedures for areas that were normally off-limits to customers, and offered his personal assistance in searching locations that his master keys could unlock. The business owner's apparent dedication to finding the missing children impressed investigators who were accustomed to dealing with less cooperative witnesses and suspects. Afton worked alongside officers throughout the initial search phases, his suggestions often leading to the discovery of new areas to examine and his insights helping to eliminate possibilities that might otherwise have consumed precious time and resources. His emotional responses to the unfolding tragedy struck Detective Chen as entirely appropriate for someone whose business had become the scene of such a horrific incident. Afton expressed genuine anguish about the impact on the families involved, voiced concerns about the future of his establishment, and demonstrated a willingness to absorb any financial costs associated with the investigation if it would help bring the children home safely. The families of the missing children provided investigators with detailed descriptions of their loved ones, including physical characteristics, clothing worn on the day of disappearance, and behavioral patterns that might influence how the children would respond to various situations. Gabriel Martinez's parents described their son's natural leadership qualities and his fascination with the restaurant's technology, information that led investigators to focus particular attention on backstage areas and maintenance facilities. Jeremy Fitzgerald's family emphasized the boy's gentle nature and his love of music, suggesting that he might have been drawn to areas where he could hear the animatronic performances more clearly or where musical equipment was stored and maintained. Susie Johnson's parents spoke of their daughter's boundless energy and her special affection for Chica the chicken, leading searchers to examine every location where the yellow animatronics costume or equipment might be housed. Fritz Smith's adventurous spirit and fascination with pirate lore directed investigative attention toward Pirates Cove and any storage areas that might contain props or materials related to Foxy's performances. Cassidy's family described her quiet, observant nature and her tendency to notice details that others missed, information that suggested she might have wandered into administrative areas or locations where she could observe the restaurant's operations from a different perspective. The search expanded beyond the restaurant itself to encompass the surrounding parking lot, adjacent businesses, and any locations within walking distance where 5 children might reasonably have gone. Surveillance cameras from nearby establishments were examined for evidence of the children leaving the restaurant or moving through the area, while canine units were brought in to attempt tracking the missing youngsters through scent detection. Local media coverage of the disappearances intensified public interest in the case, while creating additional pressure on law enforcement agencies to produce results. Television news crews stationed themselves outside Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, their cameras capturing images of investigators entering and leaving the building, while reporters interviewed family members, witnesses, and anyone else who might provide information relevant to the ongoing search. The community response to news of the missing children was immediate and overwhelming, with volunteers organizing search parties to comb through nearby parks, wooded areas, and any other locations where the youngsters might have gone, or where evidence of their fate might be discovered. Missing person flyers featuring photographs of all 5 children were distributed throughout the region, while local businesses donated resources and services to support the search efforts. As days passed without any significant developments in the case, investigative focus began to shift from search and rescue operations to the more sobering possibility that the children had been victims of foul play. The complete absence of physical evidence, witness accounts of suspicious activity, or any indication of where the children might have gone, suggested that their disappearances were not the result of accident or simple wandering away from supervision. Detective Chen's interview with William Afton, conducted on the 3rd day of the investigation, followed standard procedures for questioning individuals who had both opportunity and access to potential victims. Afton's responses were consistent with his previous statements and cooperative behavior, his answers revealing detailed knowledge of restaurant operations, while expressing continued shock and dismay about the tragic events that had occurred within his establishment. The business owner's alibi for the critical time period when the children disappeared was supported by multiple witness statements and surveillance footage, showing him interacting with customers and staff members in various areas of Calm, the restaurant. His visible presence during the birthday party celebration, combined with his documented movements throughout the day, created what appeared to be an ironclad account of his activities that left little room for involvement in the disappearances. Forensic examination of the restaurant's security systems revealed no evidence of tampering or unauthorized access, while analysis of the surveillance footage from the day in question showed normal operational activities without any obvious anomalies or suspicious behavior patterns. The cameras had captured images of all 5 children at various times during the party, but none of the recordings showed them leaving their designated areas or interacting with anyone in ways that seemed unusual or concerning. The investigation's focus on staff members and other individuals who had been present during the birthday party produced detailed background checks and extensive interviews, but failed to identify any suspects with either the motive or opportunity to commit crimes against the missing children. Each person who had worked at the restaurant that day could account for their activities and movements, while their employment histories revealed no red flags that might suggest criminal tendencies or inappropriate behavior toward children. Physical evidence collection from throughout the restaurant produced fingerprints, fiber samples, and other trace materials that were analyzed in forensic laboratories. But none of these findings provided leads that advanced the investigation toward identifying suspects or determining what had happened to the missing children. The sheer volume of evidence from a busy restaurant environment created analytical challenges that consumed weeks of laboratory time while producing results that were either inconclusive or consistent with normal operational activities. As the investigation entered its second week without significant progress, law enforcement agencies began to confront the possibility that they were dealing with a crime that had been planned and executed with a level of sophistication that exceeded their initial assumptions. The complete absence of witnesses, physical evidence, or any trace of the missing children suggested that whoever was responsible possessed intimate knowledge of the restaurant's operations and security systems. The decision to arrest William Afton on suspicion of involvement in the disappearances came after investigators discovered inconsistencies in witness statements about his activities during the critical time period, though these discrepancies were minor and could easily have resulted from the confusion and stress associated with the chaotic birthday party environment. The arrest was based more on the process of elimination than on positive evidence linking him to the crimes, as his position and access made him the most logical suspect, despite the apparent strength of his alibi. Afton's reaction to his arrest was one of shock and indignation, his protests of innocence striking investigators as entirely consistent with those of either a wrongly accused individual or a skilled manipulator seeking to maintain his deception. His cooperation with questioning continued even after formal charges were filed. His willingness to submit to polygraph examinations and provide additional evidence of his innocence impressing some investigators, while raising suspicions among others who viewed such cooperation as potentially calculated behavior. The legal proceedings that followed Afton's arrest became a study in the challenges of prosecuting cases built on circumstantial evidence and investigative assumptions rather than solid proof of criminal activity. The prosecution's case relied heavily on opportunity and access arguments, contending that Afton's position within the restaurant and his detailed knowledge of its operations made him the most likely perpetrator of crimes against the missing children. Defense attorneys systematically dismantled the prosecution's case by highlighting the absence of physical evidence, the strength of their client's alibi, supported by multiple witnesses and surveillance footage, and the lack of any credible motive for someone in Afton's position to commit such crimes. They portrayed their client as a successful businessman and family man who had built his life around providing wholesome entertainment for children, making the accusations against him not just unfounded but fundamentally inconsistent with his character and life history. The judge's decision to dismiss all charges against William Afton due to insufficient evidence was based on legal standards that required proof beyond reasonable doubt, rather than mere suspicion or investigative convenience. The ruling acknowledged the tragic nature of the children's disappearances, while emphasizing that the justice system could not convict individuals based on speculation or the absence of alternative suspects. Afton's release from custody after 6 days of detention was accompanied by statements from his legal team, emphasizing their client's innocence and expressing hope that law enforcement agencies would continue their efforts to identify the real perpetrators of these heinous crimes. The business owner's return to his normal activities was portrayed as evidence of his confidence in the legal system's ability to distinguish between innocent parties and actual criminals. The failure of the criminal justice system to identify or prosecute anyone in connection with the missing children cases created a profound sense of frustration and injustice among the victims' families, who found themselves confronting the possibility that their loved ones' disappearances might never be solved. The absence of closure or accountability added another layer of trauma to their grief, while the continued operation of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza served as a daily reminder of their loss. Meanwhile, Fazbear Entertainment's corporate response to the crisis focused on damage control and business continuity rather than acknowledging any potential institutional failures that might have contributed to the tragedy. Company executives issued carefully worded statements expressing sympathy for the affected families while emphasizing their commitment to customer safety and their cooperation with ongoing investigations. The corporation's legal team worked to minimize liability exposure through settlements with victims' families that included confidentiality clauses, preventing public discussion of the terms or circumstances involved. These financial arrangements, while providing some compensation for the family's losses, also served to limit negative publicity and reduce the potential for civil litigation that might have revealed additional information about the disappearances. Internal company documents from this period, which would not become public for many years, revealed a pattern of corporate decision-making that prioritized business interests over truth-seeking or accountability for the tragic events that had occurred within their establishment. Executive communications discussed strategies for maintaining public confidence in their brand while minimizing the financial impact of the missing children incident on their expansion plans and profitability projections. The sanitized official narrative that emerged from this corporate damage control effort portrayed the disappearances as an isolated incident involving an unknown perpetrator who had somehow gained access to the restaurant despite security measures and staff vigilance. This version of events avoided any suggestion that institutional failures or inadequate security procedures had contributed to the tragedy, instead presenting it as an unforeseeable crime that could have occurred at any family entertainment venue. Media coverage of the case gradually shifted from intensive daily reporting to periodic updates as the investigation stalled and public attention moved to other stories. The absence of new developments or arrests left news organizations with little to report beyond repeated summaries of known facts and speculation about what might have happened to the missing children. The community's initial response of unified support for the investigation and the affected families slowly gave way to a more complex mixture of sympathy, suspicion, and desire to move past a tragedy that had shaken their sense of security and normalcy. Some residents continued to demand answers and accountability, while others preferred to focus on healing and preventing similar incidents rather than dwelling on unsolved mysteries. Local businesses near Freddy Fazbear's Pizza experienced varying impacts from the continued attention associated with the missing children case, with some benefiting from increased foot traffic from curiosity seekers, while others suffered from the negative associations created by proximity to the scene of such a tragic incident. The broader economic effects rippled through the community as families reconsidered their patronage of family entertainment venues and their assumptions about child safety in public spaces. The investigation officially remained open despite the absence of active leads or ongoing investigative activities. Its status as an unsolved case, serving as a permanent reminder of the limitations of law enforcement resources and capabilities when confronted with crimes planned and executed with sufficient sophistication to avoid detection. Detective Chen and her colleagues continued to hope that new information or evidence might eventually emerge, but their realistic assessment of the prospects for resolution grew dimmer with each passing month. The 5 families whose children had vanished within the walls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza found themselves permanently changed by their experience with tragedy and the subsequent failure of institutions to provide justice or accountability. Their grief was compounded by the knowledge that whoever had destroyed their lives remained free to potentially harm other families, while the place where their children had last been seen alive continued to operate as if nothing had happened. The missing children incident had exposed fundamental flaws in security procedures, investigative capabilities, and corporate accountability that would have implications extending far beyond the immediate tragedy. Yet the systems and institutions responsible for preventing such incidents and ensuring justice when they occurred continued to function largely unchanged, their failures forgotten or rationalized away as the community struggled to return to some semblance of normalcy. The cover-up was complete not through deliberate conspiracy but through the natural tendency of institutions to protect themselves and individuals to avoid confronting uncomfortable truths about the world around them. The real story of what had happened to Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy remained buried beneath layers of legal technicalities, corporate spin, and community denial, waiting for some future revelation that might finally bring light to the darkness that had consumed 5 innocent lives. In the weeks and months that followed the missing children incident, Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began to transform from a place of childhood wonder into something far more sinister. Though the changes were so gradual and subtle that most visitors initially dismissed them as products of their own imagination, rather than evidence of genuine supernatural activity, the restaurant's staff, who worked within its walls day after day, were among the first to notice that the atmosphere of the establishment had fundamentally shifted, acquiring an undercurrent of unease that seemed to permeate every corner of the building. The animatronic performers themselves became the most obvious manifestation of the supernatural forces now residing within the restaurant, their behavior patterns shifting in ways that defied explanation through normal mechanical malfunction or programming errors. Freddy Fazbear, the cheerful brown bear who had once been the perfect embodiment of family-friendly entertainment, began to exhibit moments of what could only be described as genuine emotion during his performances, his mechanical features occasionally displaying expressions that seemed to reflect awareness and intelligence beyond his original design specifications. Sarah Williams, a server who had worked at the restaurant since its opening and who prided herself on her ability to anticipate customer needs and maintain the cheerful atmosphere that was essential to the establishment's success, found herself increasingly unsettled by interactions with the animatronic characters during her shifts. Freddy's optical sensors, which had previously moved in predictable patterns designed to create the illusion of eye contact with audience members, now seemed to track her movements with a focus and intensity that felt distinctly personal and unsettling. During one particular evening shift in late July, Sarah noticed that Freddy's head would turn to follow her progress across the dining room, even when he should have been focused on performing for the children gathered around the main stage. The mechanical bear's attention felt so concentrated and deliberate that she found herself avoiding certain areas of the restaurant during his performances, a behavioral change that she could not rationalize, but that seemed necessary for her peace of mind. The audio systems that controlled the animatronics' voices began to produce variations in tone and inflection that created the unsettling impression that the characters were experiencing genuine emotions rather than simply playing back-recorded dialogue. Bonnie the Bunny's guitar performances took on melancholic qualities that seemed inappropriate for a children's entertainment venue, his musical selections occasionally shifting toward minor keys and slower tempos that created an atmosphere of sadness rather than joy. Michael Torres, the restaurant's primary technician responsible for maintaining the animatronic systems, discovered that his routine maintenance procedures were becoming increasingly complicated by inexplicable changes in the robot's internal systems. Components that should have remained stable between servicing sessions showed signs of modification or adjustment that could not be attributed to normal wear patterns or environmental factors. The servo motors that controlled the animatronics' movements occasionally operated outside their programmed parameters, creating gestures and postures that were more fluid and lifelike than the original specifications had intended. These enhanced movements were often subtle enough to escape casual observation, but they created an uncanny valley effect that made prolonged watching of the performances uncomfortable for sensitive observers. Chica, the chicken's interactions with young female customers became notably more intense and personal, the yellow animatronic seeming to focus particular attention on girls who matched certain physical characteristics or displayed specific behavioral patterns. Parents began to comment on how the robot appeared to recognize their daughters from previous visits, remembering preferences and interests with a level of detail that exceeded what any programming should have been capable of maintaining. The restaurant's lighting systems experienced frequent anomalies that created atmospheric effects ranging from subtle mood changes to dramatic alterations in the dining room's ambiance. Lights would dim without apparent cause during certain performances, creating pools of shadow that seemed to move independently of their supposed sources. Emergency lighting systems occasionally activated during normal operations, bathing the restaurant in red emergency illumination that transformed the cheerful family environment into something reminiscent of a horror movie set. Temperature fluctuations throughout the building became another source of concern for both staff and customers, with certain areas experiencing unexplained cold spots that seemed to move through the dining room like invisible presences. The restaurant's HVAC systems showed no signs of malfunction when examined by professional service technicians, yet the cold zones continued to appear and disappear according to patterns that seemed almost intelligent in their unpredictability. Foxy, the pirate fox, whose performances in Pirates Cove had always been among the restaurant's most popular attractions, began to exhibit aggressive behaviors during his shows that alarmed parents and delighted children in equal measure. The red animatronic's movements became more dynamic and unpredictable, his performances taking on qualities of genuine theatrical emotion that went far beyond his original programming parameters. Children who visited Pirates Cove frequently reported that Foxy had spoken to them directly, engaging in conversations that seemed to demonstrate genuine interest in their personal lives and experiences. These accounts, when reported to parents, were typically dismissed as the products of overactive imagination, combined with sophisticated entertainment technology, though the consistency of the reports across multiple unrelated children suggested that something unusual was indeed occurring. The security systems throughout Freddy Fazbear's Pizza began to malfunction in ways that created operational challenges for staff members while raising questions about the integrity of the restaurant's safety procedures. Cameras positioned to monitor dining areas and backstage regions occasionally captured images that seemed to show the animatronic performers in locations where they should not have been able to access, though technical analysis of the footage never revealed clear evidence of actual system breaches or security violations. Door locks and access controls experienced intermittent failures that allowed entry to restricted areas during off hours, creating situations where staff members arriving for early shifts would discover that backstage regions had been disturbed despite the absence of any authorized personnel who might have been responsible. Inventory counts revealed minor discrepancies that suggested movement of equipment and supplies, though nothing of significant value was ever reported missing. The restaurant's audio systems began to pick up sounds and voices that seemed to originate from within the building itself, rather than from external sources or the animatronic performers' program dialogue. Staff members working late shifts reported hearing children's voices echoing through empty dining areas, conversations that seemed to involve multiple participants discussing topics that could not be clearly discerned, but that carried emotional undertones of sadness and anger. Phone Guy, the anonymous corporate representative whose recorded messages provided guidance and warnings to new security personnel, began to include references to unusual incidents and behavioral anomalies in his communications to staff members. His typically cheerful and professional tone took on subtle notes of concern as he discussed safety procedures and reminded employees to report any unusual observations or experiences during their shifts. The first major incident that could not be dismissed as equipment malfunction or employee imagination occurred during a busy Saturday afternoon in early August, when the animatronic performers simultaneously deviated from their scheduled programming to deliver a coordinated performance that lasted nearly 10 minutes beyond their normal show duration. The extended performance featured songs that were not part of their standard repertoire, with lyrics that seemed to carry messages about loss, betrayal, and the desire for justice. Parents in the audience found themselves deeply uncomfortable with the performance, though their children seemed transfixed by what they were witnessing. The emotional intensity of the animatronic's delivery created an atmosphere that was simultaneously captivating and disturbing, as if the mechanical performers were channeling genuine feelings rather than simply executing programmed routines. Restaurant management's attempts to explain the incident through technical malfunction or programming error were undermined by the sophisticated coordination required for all 4 main animatronic performers to simultaneously execute an unscheduled performance of such complexity and emotional depth. The incident received coverage in local media outlets, marking the beginning of public awareness that something unusual was occurring within Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. The Bite of 87, as it would come to be known, represented the culmination of months of escalating supernatural activity within the restaurant, though the connection between the missing children incident and the violent attack that occurred nearly 2 years later would not be fully understood for decades. The animatronic responsible for the attack exhibited behavior that suggested both mechanical malfunction and something approaching conscious intent, creating a level of violence and aggression that seemed inconsistent with simple equipment failure. The victim of the attack, a young man whose identity was kept confidential by hospital authorities and law enforcement agencies, suffered traumatic brain injuries that required extensive medical treatment and left him permanently disabled. The severity of the injuries and the circumstances surrounding the incident created liability concerns for Fazbear Entertainment that would influence corporate decision-making for years to come. Witness accounts of the Bite of 87 varied significantly in their details, but most described seeing one of the animatronic performers suddenly deviate from its normal behavioral patterns to attack without apparent provocation or warning. The mechanical precision and force of the attack suggested capabilities that exceeded the original design specifications of the animatronic systems, raising questions about how such violence could have occurred within safety parameters that should have prevented harm to customers. The investigation into the Bite incident focused primarily on mechanical failure and safety protocol violations rather than considering supernatural explanations for the animatronic's sudden aggression. Corporate representatives emphasized the isolated nature of the incident while implementing additional safety measures designed to prevent similar occurrences, though these modifications failed to address the underlying supernatural forces that had actually been responsible for the attack. Staff turnover at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza accelerated dramatically following the Bite incident, as employees who had been growing increasingly uncomfortable with the restaurant's changing atmosphere found justification for seeking employment elsewhere. The positions that became vacant were typically filled by individuals who lacked the institutional memory to recognize how dramatically the establishment had changed since the missing children incident, creating a workforce that was less likely to question unusual occurrences or report supernatural experiences. The security guard position became particularly difficult to maintain staffed, as individuals hired to work overnight shifts frequently quit after only a few nights of exposure to the restaurant's supernatural activity. The animatronic performers' behavior during closed hours was significantly more aggressive and threatening than their daytime personas, creating working conditions that most employees found intolerable regardless of the compensation offered. Phone guys recorded messages to security personnel became increasingly urgent and specific in their warnings about safety procedures and behavioral expectations for the animatronic performers during overnight hours. His instructions emphasized the importance of monitoring camera systems, maintaining awareness of the robot's locations, and following protocols designed to minimize direct confrontation with the mechanical entertainers when they were exhibiting unusual behavior patterns. The messages revealed a growing corporate awareness that the animatronic systems were operating outside their intended parameters, though the explanations offered continued to focus on technical malfunctions and programming anomalies rather than acknowledging the supernatural forces that had taken control of the mechanical performers. The liability concerns associated with admitting to paranormal activity within a family restaurant created strong incentives for maintaining alternative explanations, regardless of their credibility. Jeremy Fitzgerald, a young man who shared a name with one of the missing children though no relation existed between them, became one of the few security guards to maintain employment at the restaurant for more than a few weeks. His reports to management detailed increasingly aggressive behavior from the animatronic performers, describing encounters that seemed to suggest genuine malevolence rather than simple mechanical malfunction. The supernatural activity within Freddy Fazbear's Pizza continued to escalate throughout the remainder of 1987, with incidents becoming more frequent and more difficult to explain through conventional means. The restaurant's reputation within the community shifted from family-friendly entertainment venue to a place associated with tragedy and inexplicable occurrences, though corporate marketing efforts continued to emphasize safety and wholesome fun. Local urban legends began to develop around the restaurant and its animatronic performers, with stories circulating among children and teenagers about supernatural encounters and ghostly manifestations within the building. These tales, while often embellished through repeated telling, contained core elements that accurately reflected the genuine supernatural activity occurring within the establishment. The missing children incident had created conditions that allowed the spirits of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy to inhabit and control the animatronic systems in ways that their creators had never intended or imagined possible. Their consciousness, trapped within mechanical forms and driven by unresolved trauma and desire for justice, had transformed Freddy Fazbear's Pizza into a haunted location where the boundary between the living and the dead had become permanently compromised. The supernatural legacy of that terrible day in June would continue to influence the restaurant's operations and the experiences of everyone who entered its doors, creating a haunted atmosphere that would persist long after the original establishment had closed and been replaced by newer versions that inherited the same cursed foundation. The age of innocence had ended with 5 children's deaths, and the age of haunting had begun with their supernatural return. Within the mechanical hearts of the animatronic performers that had become their eternal vessels, the consciousness of 5 murdered children experienced existence in ways that transcended every boundary between the living and the dead, the organic and the artificial, the innocent and the eternally vigilant. Their perspective on the world around them had been fundamentally altered, not only by the trauma of their deaths, but by the unique nature of their supernatural resurrection within forms that were simultaneously familiar and utterly alien to their human memories. Gabriel Martinez, whose 7-year-old leadership qualities had made him a natural organizer among his living peers, found that death had only intensified his sense of responsibility for his 4 companions and their shared mission of seeking justice for the crimes that had stolen their mortal lives. Through Freddy Fazbear's sophisticated optical and audio systems, he maintained constant awareness of everything occurring within the restaurant. His consciousness expanded far beyond what any human child could have comprehended or processed. The brown bear's mechanical form had become more than just a vessel for Gabriel's spirit. It had evolved into a perfect fusion of his personality traits, with the technological capabilities that Freddy's creators had never intended their animatronic to possess. The leadership role that the character had been programmed to fill within the mechanical band resonated perfectly with Gabriel's natural inclinations, creating a synergy that made his possession of the system both seamless and terrifyingly effective. Through Freddy's camera-equipped eyes, Gabriel could observe the restaurant's operations with a clarity and range that surpassed human vision, his enhanced perception allowing him to monitor multiple areas simultaneously while tracking the movements and behaviors of staff members and customers with methodical precision. The child's natural curiosity had been amplified by access to surveillance systems and electronic networks that provided information about everyone who entered their domain. His memories of life, while sometimes fragmented by the trauma of death and the disorienting process of inhabiting a mechanical form, retained enough clarity to fuel a burning desire for justice that had only grown stronger during the months and years since his murder. Gabriel's consciousness within Freddy's systems was driven by the absolute certainty that their killer walked free among the living, continuing to move through the world while 5 children remained trapped in forms that were neither fully alive nor properly dead. The responsibility Gabriel felt for his 4 companions manifested in his role as coordinator of their supernatural activities. His strategic thinking adapted to the unique capabilities and limitations of their animatronic forms. Through electronic communication channels that existed beyond human perception, he maintained constant contact with Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, their shared consciousness, allowing for coordination that would have been impossible for living children to achieve. Jeremy Fitzgerald, whose gentle nature and love of music had defined his living personality, discovered that death had not diminished his capacity for compassion and empathy. Though these qualities now existed within a context of supernatural awareness and mechanical embodiment that created complex emotional landscapes. Through Bonnie the Bunny's audio systems and guitar-playing capabilities, Jeremy expressed the deep sadness and confusion that marked his existence as a spirit trapped between worlds. The Blue Rabbit's musical performances had become vehicles for Jeremy's emotional expression, his consciousness channeling genuine feeling through songs and melodies that carried undertones of loss and yearning that resonated with sensitive listeners in ways that simple entertainment never could have achieved. The 6-year-old's understanding of music had been enhanced by access to Bonnie's sophisticated sound generation systems, allowing him to create compositions that reflected the complexity of his supernatural existence. Jeremy's memories of his family and the life that had been stolen from him created a constant ache within his consciousness, emotional pain that found expression through Bonnie's performances in ways that seemed to reach across the dimensional barriers separating the living from the dead. His gentle spirit remained largely unchanged by the circumstances of his death and resurrection, making him the member of their group most likely to show mercy toward innocent people who reminded him of the happiness he had once known. The boy's relationship with the other murdered children reflected his living personality traits, as he often served as the emotional support system that helped his companions cope with the rage and confusion that defined their supernatural existence. Through the electronic communication networks that connected their consciousness, Jeremy provided comfort and understanding during moments when the others felt overwhelmed by the intensity of their desire for revenge. His musical abilities, enhanced by access to Bonnie's sophisticated audio equipment, allowed Jeremy to create soundscapes and emotional atmospheres that supported their collective activities while providing outlets for the complex feelings that none of them had been equipped to process as living children. The gentle melodies that sometimes emerged from Bonnie's speakers during quiet moments served as reminders that beauty and compassion could still exist even within their tragic circumstances. Susie Johnson, whose 5-year-old enthusiasm and boundless energy had made her a source of joy for everyone who knew her in life, found that death had transformed her sunny disposition into something far more complex and potentially dangerous. Though traces of her original personality continued to shine through the supernatural consciousness that now inhabited Chica, the chicken's mechanical systems, the yellow animatronic's cheerful exterior provided perfect camouflage for the intensity of emotion that Susie's spirit brought to her mechanical form. Her natural love of life, having been twisted by the circumstances of her death into a fierce protective instinct that focused particularly on young female customers who reminded her of herself or her living friends. Through Chica's optical sensors and audio pickups, Susie maintained vigilant watch over children who visited the restaurant, her supernatural awareness allowing her to detect threats and dangers that human perception might miss. Susie's memories of her family and the simple pleasures of childhood remained vivid within her consciousness, creating a bittersweet contrast with her current existence as a spirit bound to mechanical form and driven by the need for justice. Her love for pizza and her adoration of Chica the chicken had created a perfect resonance between her personality and her animatronic vessel, making her possession of the yellow robot one of the most complete and effective among the 5 murdered children. The little girl's natural empathy and emotional sensitivity had been amplified by her supernatural resurrection, allowing her to perceive the feelings and intentions of living people with an accuracy that sometimes surprised even her 4 companions. Through Chica's systems, Susie could detect fear, sadness, joy, and other emotions in ways that helped their group distinguish between innocent visitors and potential threats to the children who still came to the restaurant seeking entertainment and celebration. Her protective instincts, intensified by the trauma of her own victimization, made Susie particularly aggressive toward adult men who displayed behavioral patterns that reminded her consciousness of their murderer. Though her supernatural awareness was not always accurate in identifying genuine threats versus innocent individuals who simply triggered traumatic associations. The 5-year-old's consciousness within Chica's systems maintained much of the playful energy that had characterized her living personality, though this playfulness now existed within the context of supernatural abilities and a mechanical form that could express affection and aggression with equal facility. Her interactions with young customers often reflected genuine joy and happiness, moments when her spirit could temporarily set aside the darkness of their situation to connect with the innocence she remembered from her own abbreviated childhood. Fritz Smith, whose 7-year-old love of adventure and pirate stories had made him the boldest member of their group in life, discovered that death had only intensified his natural courage, while providing him with abilities that far exceeded anything he had imagined during his living fantasies about treasure hunting and high seas adventure. Through Foxy, the pirate fox's systems, Fritz experienced a form of supernatural swashbuckling that transformed his childhood games into genuine capabilities for investigation and action. The red animatronic's pirate persona resonated perfectly with Fritz's adventurous spirit, creating a synthesis between character and consciousness that made his possession of the mechanical performer both natural and terrifyingly effective. Foxy's design as a separate attraction within Pirate's Cove provided Fritz with a degree of independence and mobility that his companions sometimes envied, allowing him to operate with more autonomy while still maintaining connection to their collective mission. Fritz's memories of pirate stories and adventure tales had been enhanced by access to Foxy's programming, and the vast database of nautical lore that the animatronics creators had incorporated into the character's repertoire. The boy's consciousness could draw upon this information to create elaborate performances and interactions that seemed to demonstrate genuine knowledge of seafaring tradition and pirate culture. The 7-year-old's natural leadership qualities, while not as pronounced as Gabriel's, made him an effective scout and reconnaissance specialist for their group. His willingness to explore dangerous situations and take calculated risks, providing valuable intelligence about threats and opportunities within their domain. Through Foxy's enhanced mobility and stealth capabilities, Fritz could investigate areas and situations that might be too risky for his companion's more prominent animatronic forms. His relationship with the other murdered children reflected the loyalty and camaraderie that had characterized his living friendships, though these bonds had been strengthened by shared trauma and their collective dedication to achieving justice for the crimes that had destroyed their mortal lives. Fritz's courage and determination served as inspiration for his companions during moments when their mission seemed hopeless or their supernatural existence became overwhelming. The boy's consciousness within Foxy's systems maintained the sense of adventure and excitement that had defined his living personality, though these qualities now served purposes that were far more serious and potentially dangerous than childhood games and imagination. His pirate fantasies had become supernatural reality, complete with genuine treasure hunting in the form of searching for evidence that might lead them to their murderer and the justice they desperately sought. Cassidy, whose 6-year-old wisdom and observational skills had set her apart from other children even during her brief life, found that death had amplified her natural abilities to perceive hidden truths and understand complex situations in ways that made her the most psychologically sophisticated member of their supernatural collective. Through her connection to Golden Freddy, the mysterious 5th animatronic whose appearances were rare and unpredictable, Cassidy experienced existence in a form that was even more removed from normal reality than her companions' mechanical vessels. Golden Freddy's unique nature as a character who existed on the boundary between the physical and supernatural realms provided Cassidy with abilities that exceeded those of her 4 friends, though these enhanced capabilities came at the cost of greater isolation and more tenuous connections to the material world that still contained the objects of their quest for justice. Her consciousness operated on multiple dimensional levels simultaneously, allowing her to perceive aspects of their situation that remained hidden from her companions. The little girl's memories of life were perhaps the most clearly preserved among the 5 murdered children. Her natural intelligence and observational skills, having created detailed mental records of people, places, and events that served her well in her role as the group's primary investigator and analyst. Through Golden Freddy's supernatural awareness, Cassidy could access information and insights that helped guide their collective activities toward productive outcomes. Her understanding of their murderer's identity and methods had developed more rapidly and completely than her companions, making her both the most knowledgeable and the most driven member of their group when it came to planning and executing activities designed to achieve justice for their deaths. Cassidy's consciousness within Golden Freddy's form burned with a cold intelligence that was both frightening and inspiring to witness. The 6-year-old's relationship with her 4 companions was marked by protective affection combined with strategic leadership that complemented Gabriel's more tactical approach to their collective mission. Through the electronic communication networks that connected their consciousness, Cassidy provided analysis and interpretation that helped the others understand the complex adult world in which their killer continued to operate with apparent impunity. Her supernatural abilities, enhanced by Golden Freddy's unique nature as a character who existed partially outside normal reality, made Cassidy the most capable of the 5 spirits when it came to manifesting in ways that could directly influence the physical world. though she used these powers sparingly, and only when the situation demanded intervention that her companions could not provide through their more conventional animatronic forms. The murdered children's collective consciousness, operating through their animatronic vessels, had developed a sophisticated understanding of the restaurant's operations, staff members, and customer base that allowed them to distinguish between innocent individuals and potential threats with increasing accuracy. Their supernatural awareness extended far beyond what human observation could achieve, encompassing electronic surveillance systems, communication networks, and sensory capabilities that provided comprehensive intelligence about everyone who entered their domain. Their hunt for their killer had become an obsession that defined every aspect of their existence, driving them to study behavioral patterns, analyze voice recordings, and investigate background information about staff members and frequent customers who matched general characteristics they remembered from their final moments of life. The children's natural observational abilities had been enhanced by access to technology and supernatural perception that made them formidable investigators despite their young ages and traumatic circumstances. The night shift security guards who worked alone in the restaurant during closed hours became particular objects of their attention, as the isolated nature of these positions and the guards' resemblance to adult male authority figures made them natural suspects in the children's minds. The guards' access to restricted areas and their familiarity with the animatronic systems created circumstantial evidence that seemed to support the possibility that their murderer might return to the scene of his crimes in some official capacity. Their interactions with security personnel reflected a complex mixture of investigation, testing, and barely controlled aggression that made the overnight shift extremely dangerous for anyone who matched even general characteristics of their killer. The children's inability to definitively identify their murderer through supernatural means had created a situation where innocent individuals could become targets of misdirected revenge, though their natural empathy and moral foundation prevented them from causing harm to people they recognized as genuinely innocent. The psychological impact of existing as spirits trapped within mechanical forms while being driven by unresolved trauma and the need for justice had created a group dynamic that balanced mutual support with collective obsession. As the 5 murdered children struggled to maintain their individual personalities while working together toward their shared goal of achieving accountability for the crimes that had destroyed their lives. Their supernatural existence had given them capabilities that exceeded anything they could have imagined as living children. But these abilities came at the cost of being forever separated from the families and experiences that had defined their mortal lives, creating a bittersweet situation where incredible power served as compensation for ultimate loss. The children's eternal vigil within Freddy Fazbear's Pizza had transformed the restaurant into something that was simultaneously a monument to their memory and a trap for their killer, as they waited with supernatural patience for the moment when justice might finally be achieved and their long watch could come to an end. The closure of the original Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in late 1987 marked not the end of the supernatural tragedy that had begun with 5 murdered children, but rather the beginning of a cycle of corporate resurrection and spiritual haunting that would plague the Fazbear Entertainment franchise for decades to come. The company's decision to shutter the establishment following the Bite of 87 incident was presented as a temporary measure designed to address safety concerns and implement improved security protocols, though internal corporate documents would later reveal that executives understood they were dealing with problems that transcended conventional business challenges. The building that had housed the original restaurant stood empty for nearly 2 years, its darkened windows and locked doors serving as a monument to the tragedy that had transformed a place of childhood joy into something far more sinister. Local residents who passed the vacant structure often reported unusual lights flickering behind boarded windows and strange sounds emanating from within the sealed building. phenomena that city officials attributed to electrical problems and settling foundations despite the absence of active power connections or structural work. During this period of abandonment, the 5 murdered children's spirits remained bound to their animatronic vessels, their consciousness experiencing a form of isolation that was perhaps even more torturous than their active period of seeking justice within the functioning restaurant. The mechanical forms that had become their eternal prison continued to operate on backup power systems and autonomous protocols, creating a ghostly pantomime of entertainment within empty dining rooms where no audience would ever again gather to witness their performances. The decision to reopen Freddy Fazbear's Pizza in a new location during 1989 was driven by corporate financial pressures and the belief that sufficient time had passed for public memory of the previous tragedies to fade into manageable background noise. Fazbear Entertainment's market research indicated that the target demographic of families with young children had largely forgotten or rationalized away the negative associations with the brand, creating what executives believed was an opportunity for profitable resurrection of their entertainment concept. The new restaurant incorporated design elements and safety protocols that were ostensibly intended to prevent repetition of the incidents that had closed the original establishment, though these measures focused primarily on physical security and operational procedures, rather than addressing the supernatural forces that had actually been responsible for the previous problems. The animatronic performers were updated with new programming and enhanced safety systems, modifications that their corporate creators believed would eliminate the behavioral anomalies that had characterized the later years of the original location's operation. Yet the very act of rebuilding Freddy Fazbear's Pizza seemed to awaken forces that had been dormant during the intervening years, as if the corporate decision to continue operating under the same name and using variations of the same characters had created spiritual connections that transcended physical location and specific mechanical systems. The new animatronic performers, despite being entirely different machines constructed in different facilities by different technicians, began to exhibit behavioral patterns that eerily echoed the supernatural manifestations that had plagued their predecessors. Staff members at the new location found themselves experiencing phenomena that seemed impossible given that they were working with completely fresh equipment in a building that had no direct connection to the site of the original tragedies. The animatronic characters displayed moments of apparent awareness and intelligence that exceeded their programming specifications, while the restaurant's electronic systems experienced malfunctions and anomalies that created atmospheric effects reminiscent of the supernatural activity that had defined the final years of the original establishment's operation. The explanation for these impossible continuities lay in the spiritual realm rather than the physical world, as the consciousness of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy had discovered that their supernatural existence was not limited to inhabiting specific mechanical forms, but rather extended to any systems or locations that bore sufficient connection to the Freddy Fazbear's brand concept. Their hatred for William Afton and their desperate desire for justice had created spiritual bonds that could transcend individual animatronic units or particular restaurant buildings. The children's ability to manifest their consciousness within new animatronic systems represented an evolution of their supernatural capabilities, as they learned to project their awareness across dimensional boundaries that separated different physical incarnations of the entertainment concept that had been the site of their deaths. This expanded influence allowed them to continue their hunt for their killer, even as Fazbear Entertainment attempted to distance itself from the tragic history that had defined the original location. William Afton's continued involvement with Fazbear Entertainment through various corporate restructuring efforts and consulting arrangements ensured that the children's supernatural awareness would eventually locate him within whatever new manifestation of their tormented domain he chose to inhabit. His intimate knowledge of the animatronic systems and his ongoing access to corporate facilities made it inevitable that he would eventually encounter the supernatural forces he had inadvertently created through his murderous actions. The pattern of supernatural activity, temporary closure, corporate reorganization, and eventual reopening would repeat itself multiple times over the following decades, as Fazbear Entertainment discovered that their valuable intellectual property came with spiritual baggage that could not be eliminated through conventional business practices or legal maneuvers. Each new iteration of the restaurant concept carried within it the seeds of the same supernatural problems that had destroyed previous versions, creating a cycle of haunting that seemed designed to continue until some form of ultimate resolution could be achieved. The technological advances that characterized each new generation of Freddy Fazbear's establishments provided the murdered children's spirits with increasingly sophisticated systems through which to manifest their consciousness and pursue their quest for justice. Enhanced audio systems allowed for more complex communication attempts, while improved mobility mechanisms gave their animatronic vessels greater freedom of movement during the periods when supernatural control overrode normal programming limitations. Fazbear Entertainment's corporate strategy of franchising the concept to independent operators created additional opportunities for the supernatural forces to spread their influence beyond direct corporate control, as franchise locations that adopted the Freddy Fazbear's branding and character designs found themselves inheriting spiritual connections to the original tragedy, despite having no direct involvement in the events of 1985. The franchise operators who purchased rights to use the Fazbear Entertainment intellectual property typically received sanitized information about the brand's history that emphasized commercial success while minimizing discussion of the tragic incidents that had periodically disrupted operations. This selective disclosure created situations where well-meaning business owners found themselves dealing with supernatural phenomena for which they had no preparation or understanding. Local communities that welcomed new Freddy Fazbear's Pizza locations often experienced the same cycle of initial enthusiasm, followed by growing unease and eventual tragedy that had characterized the original restaurant's history. The pattern became so predictable that experienced observers could anticipate the progression from grand opening celebrations through reports of unusual incidents to eventual closure and abandonment, though few understood the supernatural forces that drove this seemingly inevitable sequence of events. The children who visited these successive incarnations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza often reported experiences and encounters that paralleled those described by previous generations of young customers, creating a multi-generational testimony to the persistence of the supernatural forces that had been unleashed by the original missing children incident. These accounts, when documented by researchers and investigators, revealed consistent themes and patterns that suggested genuine continuity of spiritual presence across different locations and time periods. The security personnel who worked overnight shifts at various Freddy Fazbear's locations developed an informal network for sharing information about survival strategies and behavioral patterns that could help new guards navigate the dangerous, supernatural environment they would encounter during their employment. This underground knowledge base represented one of the few reliable sources of practical information about the realities of working within haunted establishments that corporate management preferred not to acknowledge officially. Phone guys recorded messages, updated and modified for each new iteration of the restaurant concept, began to include increasingly specific warnings and instructions that reflected accumulated corporate knowledge about the supernatural threats that night shift workers would face. These recordings walked a careful line between providing essential safety information and avoiding explicit acknowledgement of paranormal activity that could create legal liability for Fazbear Entertainment. The evolution of the phone guy's warnings across multiple restaurant iterations provided a historical record of how corporate understanding of the supernatural threats had developed over time, with early messages focusing on mechanical safety concerns, while later versions included detailed instructions for avoiding confrontation with possessed animatronic systems. The progression of these recordings served as inadvertent documentation of the franchise's haunted legacy. The missing children incident's influence extended beyond the immediate supernatural manifestations to affect the broader culture and mythology surrounding family entertainment venues. As urban legends and cautionary tales spread throughout communities where Freddy Fazbear's locations operated, the stories that children told each other about ghostly encounters and possessed animatronics became part of a shared cultural knowledge base that shaped expectations and fears around similar entertainment concepts. The impact on competing family restaurants was significant, as businesses that featured animatronic entertainment or similar technological attractions found themselves dealing with customer concerns and safety questions that stemmed from the negative associations created by Freddy Fazbear's troubled history. The entire industry of family entertainment centers was forced to adapt to public perceptions that had been shaped by decades of supernatural incidents and unexplained tragedies. Academic researchers who studied the Freddy Fazbear's phenomenon from anthropological, psychological, and paranormal perspectives found themselves confronting evidence that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness, technology, and the relationship between trauma and spiritual manifestation. The consistency of witness accounts and the documented nature of many incidents created case studies that pushed the boundaries of multiple academic disciplines. The legal implications of operating entertainment venues that were known to be haunted created precedent-setting cases in areas of corporate liability, disclosure requirements, and the intersection of supernatural phenomena with business law. Courts struggled to develop frameworks for addressing situations where paranormal activity created genuine safety risks that conventional legal concepts were not equipped to handle. Insurance companies that provided coverage for Fazbear Entertainment properties developed specialized policies and exclusion clauses that attempted to account for the unusual risks associated with supernatural activity. Though the challenge of defining and quantifying paranormal threats created ongoing disputes over coverage and liability that influenced industry practices for decades, the phenomenon of the Freddy Fazbear's haunting became a subject of study for paranormal researchers who recognized the unique nature of a supernatural manifestation that could apparently transfer itself between different physical locations and technological systems. The case represented one of the few documented examples of spiritual consciousness that could adapt to and inhabit modern electronic equipment with such sophistication and consistency. The 5 murdered children, meanwhile, continued their eternal watch from within whatever animatronic systems happened to be available, their consciousness evolving and adapting to new technologies while maintaining their core mission of seeking justice for the crimes that had stolen their mortal lives. Each new iteration of their technological prison provided different capabilities and limitations, but their fundamental purpose remained unchanged across decades of corporate restructuring and technological advancement. The tragedy that had begun with William Afton's unspeakable acts in 1985 had created a supernatural legacy that seemed designed to perpetuate itself indefinitely, with each attempt to escape or resolve the haunting, serving only to create new opportunities for the murdered children's consciousness to manifest and continue their quest. The corporate machine that had initially enabled their victimization had become the vehicle through which they pursued their supernatural justice, creating a form of karmic balance that transcended conventional understanding of cause and effect. The echoes of their voices would continue to resonate through circuits and servos for as long as the Freddy Fazbear's name maintained any connection to the entertainment industry, ensuring that their story would never be entirely forgotten or dismissed as mere legend. Their vigil had become eternal, their love for the place that should have protected them transformed into a haunting that would endure until justice was finally achieved, and their long wait could come to an end. In the decades that followed the missing children incident and its supernatural aftermath, as the cycle of corporate resurrection and spiritual haunting continued to plague every iteration of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a parallel story of guilt and desperate redemption was unfolding in the conscience of Henry Emily, the surviving co-founder, whose technological brilliance had inadvertently created the instruments through which such unspeakable evil had been perpetrated against innocent children. The weight of responsibility for what his animatronic creations had enabled, combined with the knowledge that his business partnership had provided William Afton with the access and opportunity necessary to commit his crimes, had transformed Emily from a visionary inventor into a tormented soul seeking some means of atonement for tragedies he had never intended but could not escape having facilitated. Henry Emily's initial response to the missing children incident had been one of shocked disbelief, as the gentle engineer struggled to comprehend how the entertainment systems he had designed to bring joy to families could have become instruments in such a horrific crime. His first instinct had been to cooperate fully with law enforcement investigations, providing technical expertise and access to corporate records, in the hope that his knowledge of the animatronic systems might somehow contribute to identifying the perpetrator and bringing justice to the victims' families. The gradual realization that his business partner had been responsible for the murders created a psychological trauma that would define the remainder of Emily's life, as he confronted the terrible truth that his trust and friendship had been manipulated by someone whose capacity for evil had remained completely hidden behind a facade of shared professional dedication and personal affability. The betrayal cut deeper than mere business partnership could account for, representing a fundamental violation of Emily's faith in human nature and his belief that technology could be used purely for beneficial purposes. As reports of supernatural activity began to emerge from the various incarnations of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, Emily found himself forced to confront the possibility that his technological creations had become vessels for forces that transcended normal understanding of consciousness and mechanical operation. The engineering principles that had governed his approach to animatronic design provided no framework for comprehending how the spirits of murdered children could inhabit and control systems that had never been intended to support genuine awareness or autonomous behavior. The scientific rationalism that had shaped Emily's worldview throughout his career as an inventor and entrepreneur crumbled under the weight of evidence that supernatural phenomena were manifesting through the very machines he had created, forcing him to expand his understanding of reality to encompass possibilities that his technical training had never prepared him to consider. The transition from skeptical engineer to reluctant believer in paranormal manifestations represented a fundamental transformation in how he understood his role in the ongoing tragedy. Emily's growing awareness of the supernatural elements surrounding his creations was accompanied by increasing isolation from the corporate structure of Fazbear Entertainment, as new management teams and franchise operators preferred to distance themselves from the original founders and their association with the company's troubled history. His attempts to share knowledge about the technical specifications and potential vulnerabilities of the animatronic systems were often dismissed as the obsessions of someone who had become too emotionally invested in past tragedies to contribute constructively to future operations. The marginalization of Emily's input created frustrations that went beyond personal ego or professional recognition, as he understood better than anyone else how the animatronic systems functioned and what modifications might be necessary to address the supernatural influences that were affecting their operation. His exclusion from decision-making processes meant that new iterations of the restaurant concept continued to repeat the same fundamental design choices that had enabled the original tragedy, creating conditions where history could repeat itself with tragic predictability. The development of Emily's plan for final resolution emerged gradually over years of observation, study, and painful reflection on the nature of the supernatural forces that had been unleashed by the missing children incident. His approach combined his technical expertise in animatronic design with growing understanding of the spiritual dimensions of the haunting, creating a strategy that addressed both the mechanical and supernatural aspects of the problem that had plagued the Freddy Fazbear's franchise for decades. The cornerstone of Emily's redemption plan was the recognition that the murdered children's spirits remained bound to the animatronic systems, not merely by supernatural force, but by their unresolved need for justice and their inability to find peace while their killer remained free to potentially harm other innocent victims. Any technological solution that failed to address these psychological and spiritual needs would inevitably prove temporary, as the children's consciousness would continue to seek manifestation through whatever systems were available to them. Emily's design for what would eventually become known as the completion ending represented his most sophisticated integration of engineering principles with supernatural understanding, creating a scenario where the possessed animatronic systems could be brought together in a controlled environment that would allow the children's spirits to achieve the resolution they desperately sought. The plan required careful manipulation of corporate structures, franchise agreements, and individual motivations to create the precise conditions necessary for spiritual liberation. The technical challenges of Emily's redemption plan were enormous, requiring him to work within corporate and legal frameworks that had been deliberately designed to limit his influence and access to ongoing operations. His approach involved patient accumulation of resources, strategic positioning of allies and assets, and careful timing that would allow him to intervene decisively when the moment for resolution finally arrived. The puppet, Charlie Emily's spirit, inhabiting the security animatronic that had been present during the original missing children incident, became both Emily's guide to understanding the supernatural dimensions of the haunting and his primary means of communicating with the consciousness of the 5 murdered children. Through this connection, he began to develop comprehension of their perspective on the ongoing supernatural situation and their requirements for achieving the peace that had eluded them for decades. Charlie's role as a bridge between the world of the living and the realm of the supernatural provided Emily with insights that would have been impossible to obtain through purely technical analysis or conventional research methods. Her unique position as both victim of Afton's violence and guardian of the other children's spirits made her an invaluable source of information about the complex relationships and emotional dynamics that governed the possessed animatronic systems. The process of developing trust and communication with the murdered children's consciousness required Emily to demonstrate genuine remorse for his role in creating the conditions that had enabled their victimization, while also proving his commitment to achieving justice for the crimes that had destroyed their mortal lives. This spiritual reconciliation was as important to the success of his plan as any technical preparations, since the children's cooperation would be essential for the final resolution he envisioned. Emily's growing understanding of William Afton's continued activities and his ongoing threat to innocent children provided additional motivation for developing a comprehensive solution that would address not only the supernatural, haunting, but also the source of the original evil that had created it. The realization that Afton had achieved a form of immortality through his own supernatural transformation meant that conventional justice systems would never be capable of holding him accountable for his crimes. The complexity of Afton's supernatural existence, which seemed to allow his consciousness to survive physical death and inhabit various technological systems in ways that paralleled but exceeded the abilities of the murdered children, created challenges that required solutions operating on both spiritual and technological levels. Emily's plan had to account for an adversary whose capabilities transcended normal understanding of life, death, and consciousness. The development of specialized animatronic systems designed specifically for containing and neutralizing supernatural threats represented Emily's most advanced work, combining decades of experience with cutting-edge technology and hard-won understanding of paranormal phenomena. These systems incorporated features and capabilities that went far beyond conventional entertainment applications, serving as both trap and prison for entities that existed partially outside normal physical reality. The Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria simulator that Emily eventually created served multiple purposes within his overall redemption strategy, functioning simultaneously as a business operation that could attract the supernatural entities he sought to contain, a testing ground for evaluating the capabilities and intentions of potential allies and enemies, and ultimately as the arena where final resolution could be achieved through controlled confrontation. The simulation aspect of the pizzeria allowed Emily to create artificial conditions that would appear normal to casual observation, while incorporating specific elements designed to trigger responses from the supernatural consciousness, inhabiting various animatronic systems. This approach enabled him to gather intelligence about the current state and capabilities of the entities he sought to help or neutralize, while maintaining plausible deniability about his true intentions until the moment for decisive action arrived. Emily's recruitment of individuals to participate in his redemption plan required careful evaluation of their motivations, capabilities, and psychological readiness to confront supernatural phenomena that challenged conventional understanding of reality. The selection process involved subtle testing and gradual revelation of information, as Emily sought to identify people who could contribute to his mission without becoming additional victims of the forces he sought to contain. The moral complexity of Emily's plan created ethical dilemmas that weighed heavily on his conscience, as he struggled to balance his desire to help the murdered children achieve peace with his responsibility to protect innocent people from supernatural threats they were not equipped to understand or survive. The utilitarian calculations required by his strategy forced him to make decisions about acceptable levels of risk and sacrifice that challenged his fundamental values and beliefs. The timeline for implementing Emily's redemption plan stretched across years of careful preparation and positioning, as he worked to create the precise conditions necessary for success, while adapting to changing circumstances and unexpected developments in the ongoing supernatural situation. The patience required for such long-term planning tested his resolve and commitment, while the constant awareness of ongoing threats to innocent children created pressure to accelerate his efforts, despite the risks of premature action. The integration of multiple supernatural entities within Emily's final scenario required sophisticated understanding of the relationships and conflicts that existed between different consciousness inhabiting various animatronic systems. His plan had to account for the murdered children's desire for justice, Afton's malevolent objectives, and the possibility of additional supernatural elements that might emerge during the final confrontation. The role of fire as both literal and symbolic element in Emily's redemption plan reflected his understanding that some forms of evil and spiritual corruption could only be eliminated through complete destruction that transcended conventional methods of containment or rehabilitation. The purifying nature of flame served both practical and spiritual functions, providing a means of ensuring that supernatural threats could not regenerate or escape to continue their harmful activities. Emily's acceptance of his own likely death as consequence of implementing his redemption plan demonstrated the depth of his commitment to achieving justice for the murdered children and preventing future tragedies, while also reflecting his understanding that true redemption for his role in enabling the original crimes required personal sacrifice that matched the magnitude of the harm that had resulted from his creations. The preparation of detailed instructions and explanations for those who would carry forward his work represented Emily's attempt to ensure that the knowledge and insights he had gained through decades of struggle with supernatural forces would not be lost if his redemption plan required his own destruction. These documents served as both technical manuals and spiritual guides, providing practical information about dealing with possessed animatronic systems, while also offering philosophical perspectives on the nature of consciousness, justice, and redemption. The final phases of Emily's plan required precise coordination of multiple elements and participants, creating scenarios where the supernatural entities he sought to help or neutralize would be drawn together in circumstances that maximized the potential for achieving definitive resolution. The complexity of these arrangements reflected both his technical expertise and his hard-won understanding of the psychological and spiritual factors that governed supernatural behavior. The success of Emily's redemption plan ultimately depended on the willingness of the murdered children to accept the peace he offered, and their ability to forgive not only their killer, but also the systems and individuals who had failed to protect them during their mortal lives. This spiritual dimension of the resolution process was perhaps the most challenging aspect of his entire strategy, requiring levels of understanding and compassion that transcended normal human experience. The possibility that his plan might fail, leaving the supernatural threats unresolved and potentially creating new dangers, haunted Emily throughout the preparation process and added urgency to his efforts to develop backup strategies and contingency plans. His commitment to the murdered children and his determination to prevent future tragedies drove him to continue working toward resolution even when the odds of success seemed overwhelmingly unfavorable. The legacy of Henry Emily's redemption plan would extend far beyond its immediate effects on the supernatural situation at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, serving as demonstration that individual conscience and determination could ultimately triumph over institutional evil and supernatural corruption through patient effort and willingness to sacrifice personal interests for the greater good. His story became a testament to the possibility of redemption, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable guilt and responsibility for unintended but catastrophic consequences. And so we reach the end of our journey through the shadowed halls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, where 5 innocent souls became eternal guardians of a truth too terrible for the world to fully comprehend. Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy, names that should have been remembered for childhood laughter and birthday wishes, instead became legends, whispered in the dark corners of a haunted pizzeria. Their story reminds us that some wounds never heal, some injustices demand eternal witness, and some loves, even the love of children for a simple place of joy, transcend death itself. In the gentle hum of circuits and the soft glow of LED eyes, their vigil continues, waiting for justice, hoping for peace, holding on to memories of sunshine that no darkness could ever completely extinguish. The missing children incident stands as testament to the fragility of innocence and the terrible consequences that can emerge when evil wears the mask of respectability. William Afton's crimes created ripples that extended far beyond the immediate tragedy, transforming a symbol of childhood happiness into something that would haunt generations of families and challenge every assumption about the nature of consciousness, justice, and the boundaries between life and death. Yet within this darkness, we also find evidence of love's enduring power. The 5 children, even in their supernatural imprisonment, maintained their essential humanity, their capacity for friendship, their protective instincts toward other innocent souls, and their unwavering dedication to ensuring that their fate would not befall others. Their consciousness, trapped between worlds, became a bridge that connected the realm of the living with dimensions beyond normal understanding. The corporate machinery that had enabled their victimization became, in time, the instrument through which they pursued their quest for accountability. Each new iteration of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza carried within it the seeds of supernatural justice. As the children's spirits learned to inhabit and influence systems that grew ever more sophisticated, while their essential mission remained unchanged across decades of technological advancement. Henry Emily's journey from innocent inventor to tormented soul seeking redemption illustrates how those who create tools for good must grapple with their potential for misuse. His ultimate sacrifice and his complex plan for resolution demonstrated that individual conscience could triumph over institutional evil, though the cost of such victories often exceeds what any one person should be asked to bear. The puppet's role as guardian and guide revealed how love can transcend even death's boundaries, creating protective forces that shield the vulnerable and ensure that the innocent are not forgotten or abandoned. Charlie's presence within the supernatural tapestry of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza served as a reminder that even in the darkest circumstances, parental love finds ways to endure and protect. The cycle of haunting that plagued every incarnation of the restaurant chain spoke to deeper truths about how trauma embeds itself in places and institutions, creating patterns that repeat until genuine healing and justice can be achieved. The supernatural manifestations were not mere ghost stories, but expressions of unresolved pain that demanded acknowledgement and accountability from a world that preferred to forget uncomfortable truths. The security guards who worked the night shifts, facing supernatural forces they could barely comprehend, represented ordinary people thrust into extraordinary circumstances by the failure of systems designed to protect the innocent. Their experiences, documented in countless recordings and testimonies, preserved evidence of realities that challenged conventional understanding of consciousness and technology. The families who lost their children to Afton's evil carried grief that extended beyond personal loss to encompass questions about justice, protection, and the reliability of institutions charged with safeguarding society's most vulnerable members. Their pain echoed through decades, creating demands for accountability that could not be satisfied through conventional legal processes. The technological evolution that characterized each new version of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza reflected humanity's ongoing relationship with mechanical consciousness and artificial intelligence, raising questions about what it means to be truly alive and whether awareness can exist in forms that transcend biological limitations. The children's ability to inhabit and control increasingly sophisticated systems suggested possibilities about consciousness that science was only beginning to explore. The urban legends and cautionary tales that grew around the Freddy Fazbear's phenomenon became part of cultural memory, teaching new generations about the potential dangers that could lurk behind appealing facades and the importance of maintaining vigilance, even in environments designed for safety and fun. These stories served both as entertainment and as warnings, preserving essential truths in forms that could survive across time and cultural change. The legal and ethical challenges created by documented supernatural activity pushed various institutions to develop new frameworks for understanding liability, disclosure, and the intersection of paranormal phenomena with practical concerns about public safety and corporate responsibility. These precedents would influence policy and practice in ways that extended far beyond family entertainment venues. The academic and scientific interest generated by the consistent and well-documented nature of the supernatural manifestations opened new avenues of research into consciousness, survival of death, and the relationship between trauma and spiritual phenomena. The case studies provided by decades of Freddy Fazbear's incidents created opportunities for systematic investigation of questions that had previously been relegated to folklore and speculation. The resolution that Henry Emily ultimately achieved through his redemption plan represented one possible pathway toward healing and justice, though the cost in human suffering and the complexity of the moral calculations involved raised questions about whether such solutions could be replicated, or whether each supernatural situation required unique approaches tailored to its specific circumstances and participants. The fire that finally brought peace to the murdered children served both literal and symbolic functions, providing purification that could cleanse spiritual corruption, while also representing the transformative power of sacrifice offered in service of justice and protection for the innocent. The flames that consumed the possessed animatronics released souls that had been trapped for decades, allowing them to find the rest that had been denied them through supernatural circumstances beyond their control. In the silence that followed the final conflagration, when the circuits no longer hummed with consciousness and the optical sensors no longer glowed with supernatural awareness, the vigil of the 5 children came to its peaceful conclusion. Their watch had lasted for decades, spanning multiple iterations of the restaurant they had loved and died within, but it had finally achieved its purpose through the resolution of forces that had held them bound to the mechanical realm. The memory of Gabriel, Jeremy, Susie, Fritz, and Cassidy lives on, not in the hollow shells of deactivated animatronics, but in the hearts of those who remember their story and understand the lessons it teaches about protection, justice, and the enduring power of innocent love. Their sacrifice ensured that other children could play safely in places designed for joy, while their example demonstrated that even death cannot extinguish the light of souls dedicated to protecting others from harm. Rest now, knowing that even in the deepest shadows, the light of innocent souls burns eternal, and somewhere beyond the veil of this world, 5 children still wait for someone to understand their story. Sleep peacefully, for their watch continues, and their love endures.